Chapter 1203. Recognized. Ethan pressed his cheek against the stock of the XM-109, clutching the armor-piercing sniper rifle as though it were the only thing between him and oblivion. The pavement below him was rough and stained with blood, but he barely noticed. The XM-109 was his pride. Its 25mm rounds could punch clean through at least 50mm of armored steel, small-caliber artillery in rifle form. Ethan's confidence soared with every breath. He squeezed the trigger and watched the tracer round slam into the target's chest. The shell slammed home with a satisfying thud, lodging deep in the mysterious figure's armor. But when Ethan raised his head to confirm the kill, his jaw dropped. The bullet had not passed through. It was buried in the creature's chest plate, but the thing simply stood there, unscathed. A creeping disbelief washed over him as he studied the silhouette. It wasn't a mutated soldier or a hulking monstrosity at all, but a cat, a massive jet-black tomcat with rippling muscles and eyes that gleamed like polished obsidian. The animal's fur bristled, and its low, rumbling growl shook the air. "What is that?" Ethan muttered, incredulous. He'd faced everything from human mercenaries to ravenous mutants, but never a cat like this, towering, powerful, and utterly unfazed by a direct hit from his most potent weapon. Although a cat demon might have made sense, this ordinary-looking black cat was something else entirely. It was the same beast that had slaughtered 100 Kyoto pioneers, and now it had her in its sights. A deep despair washed over Nanlixiang as she tried to comprehend where this cat had come from, or how it could move and strike with such unbelievable power and speed. Before she could steady herself, the black cat leapt, a streak of shadow as swift as lightning. Instinctively, Nanlixiang pressed her sniper rifle against her chest, using it like a shield. The cat's claws carved a silver arc through the air and crashed into the barrel with a bone-rattling clang. Sparks flew as metal bit metal, and the rifle shuddered violently under the impact. A brutal recoil drove the wind from her lungs, her vision flared with stars, and the world tilted as pressure flooded her head. Ethan sank to his knees, the world around him spinning in a blur of grief and fear. Now that she was gone, now that Shizuka Juchuan, that big, brainless ox, lay dead at his feet, he had no shield against the dangers of this ruthless age. Without her strength to guard him, he was nothing but prey, to be toyed with by rival sects, bartered like cattle by unscrupulous warlords, or, worst of all, claimed as someone's personal pet, stripped of every scrap of dignity. Anger and helplessness churned inside him. He hated how small and vulnerable he felt. He hated that he couldn't think of a single person who'd step in now to save him. Then in an instant, the small black cat that had been prowling at his side disintegrated in a flash of dark smoke. Ethan's heart leapt into his throat. Someone was coming. Someone had come for him. "Are you all right?" A soft voice drifted through the clearing. Through the curling tendrils of inky mist, a graceful figure appeared, dressed in a simple kimono that swayed like water. Her movements were so light and elegant, he could have sworn she stepped out of an ancient painting. Ethan struggled to his feet, every muscle trembling as he stared at her. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her purpose. To demand that information too hastily might create a needless enemy, yet staying silent felt equally perilous. He steadied his breathing and waited, unsure whether to bow in gratitude or prepare for an attack. Either way, he would choose his next words with care. Ethan staggered to his feet, every muscle screaming in protest, as the woman before him watched in silence. Though her expression never faltered, he could feel her appraisal keenly. She'd seen the fire of his resolve and the raw vitality he'd summoned in the fight moments ago. The cuts and bruises he bore told a simple, powerful story. Ethan refused, Ed to yield even when outmatched. That quiet strength earned her genuine respect. "Come with me," she said at last, her voice crisp and assured. Ethan paused, narrowing his eyes as he took in the stranger's lithe form and steady stance. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone edged with caution. He had no idea if this woman was friend or foe. A faint smile curved her lips. "I'm Grasson of Poison Island." At the mention of her name, Ethan felt a shock run through him, as if thunder clapped at close range. Poison Island Grasson, one of the fabled three maidens of the gods. In this new century of the Great Spirit era, she was whispered of as the very embodiment of luck, her fortune more extraordinary than any mortal who'd ever scooped 6 straight Mark 6 lotteries for $100 million each. Ethan squared his shoulders. No matter how legendary her reputation, he wasn't about to be steamrolled without knowing where she stood. Yet as her steady gaze met his, he sensed there was far more at play here than mere chance. And deep down, he knew this encounter would change everything. Ethan's heart pounded in disbelief. After all, only 3 people out of 8 billion ever earn the honor of serving as a goddess's maid, an odds-defying miracle. Misako of Poison Isle was one of those 3, a living legend whose name blazed like the brightest star in the night sky, impossible to ignore. He had never expected to meet her, let alone find himself the object of her attention. Why me? He wondered, staring at her serene smile. Misako inclined her head gracefully. I'm taking you with me. Ethan hesitated, his voice catching. May I ask where you're taking me? She let her smile deepen, as though she were revealing the world's greatest secret. To the Celestial Temple. His breath hitched. The Celestial Temple, the very dwelling of the gods, a place no mortal had ever been permitted to enter. Surely she couldn't mean. Misako's eyes held a playful glint. Yes, you. Ethan swallowed hard. He'd always been proud of his looks. He knew his face could turn heads among ordinary people. But standing here, on the brink of something impossible, he felt as ordinary as anyone. And yet, by some twist of fate, a goddess's hand was reaching out to him. Ethan stood at the edge of the clearing, watching Nanlixiang's restless figure. For years, she'd entertained grand dreams of mastering demonic arts and unlocking world-shaking spiritual power, ideas that to most looked like nothing more than a clown's performance. She'd never taken them too seriously, because she knew her ambitions stretched far beyond such parlor tricks. Yes, she'd once envied the Poison Island sect's good fortune, but only as a fleeting pang of jealousy. Deep down, she recognized her own shortcomings. She wasn't yet strong enough, nor qualified, to stand alongside the so-called world gods. And yet here she was, summoned. Where exactly am I to go? Nanlixiang asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and disbelief. The disciple from Poison Island, Shunzi, inclined his head respectfully. You have exceptional spiritual aptitude. The master noticed you and commanded that you be brought here. A warmth flooded Nanlixiang's chest. She'd never dared hope the world gods would even acknowledge her existence. For a heartbeat, she felt dizzy with surprise. Then that surge of recognition filled her with joy. She'd heard plenty of praise for her beauty over the years, but nothing compared to this validation of her true worth. After all, though they're called gods, these world gods are mortals who have harnessed divine power. They choose their disciples not for looks, but for the talent and resolve they see within. And now, Nanlixiang realized, she had finally caught their attention. Ethan's gift lay in reading a person's aura at a single glance. Around the Tiangong Temple, countless beautiful women had come, each one eager to attract the notice of the world's gods. Chapter 1204. Ethan joins the Temple of Tiangong rose above the clouds like a celestial fortress, its grandeur rivaling the very heavens. Even Ethan's most vivid imaginings paled in comparison to the awe-inspiring sight before him. Golden, glazed tiles sparkled under the sun, each one seemingly infused with divine power. The palace walls, hewn from flawless white jade, bore intricate carvings that shifted in the light, hinting at ancient mysteries. Massive jade pillars, inlaid with multicolored gems, chimed softly whenever the breeze stirred. Nature itself performed here, offering a serene, crystalline melody. As Ethan crossed the threshold into this sacred realm, a complex surge of emotions swept through him. He had dreamed of the Temple of Tiangong countless times, yet reality surpassed every fantasy. Every cautious step he took felt like a risk. Who was he, a mere mortal, to tread these hallowed halls? The air itself carried a subtle, otherworldly fragrance, a heavenly aroma that seemed to elevate the spirit, smoothing away his doubts and filling him with a reverent energy. Here, amid the radiant glow and tranquil sounds, Ethan paused to collect himself. He knew this moment marked the beginning of a journey unlike any other, one that would test his resolve and shape his destiny in ways he could scarcely imagine. Yet, standing within the temple's embrace, he felt ready to embrace whatever trials lay ahead. As Nan Lixiang stood transfixed by the soaring columns and carved reliefs of the Temple of Tiangong, her eyes drifted to an entirely different presence, Ethan. He stood quietly a short distance away, a faint halo of light rippling outward from him, marking him as someone far beyond ordinary. Contrary to her expectations, Ethan wore no ornate robes or lavish adornments, yet there was an undeniable majesty about him, an almost sacred dignity that no finery could match. He seemed like a lone, jagged peak rising against the sky, every subtle movement and breath resonating with the very pulse of heaven and earth. The air around him quivered ever so slightly, as if reacting to some force beyond the material realm, something Nan Lixiang had never before experienced. She found herself holding her breath, afraid that even a whisper might shatter the profound stillness he commanded. "Master, I have brought her," came a clear, composed voice, Poison Island's sister-in-law, breaking Nan Lixiang's reverie. The unexpected words jolted her heart into a rapid flutter. In an instant, she realized she was the focus of attention for not one, but two extraordinary figures. Anxiety bloomed in her chest as her pulse quickened, and her palms grew damp with anticipation. Nan Lixiang took a steadying breath, forced her racing heart to slow, and bowed deeply according to court etiquette. "I have seen the god of this world," she said, her voice respectful but quivering at the edges. Ethan smiled then, warm, gentle, as if his very presence could part any lingering fog of fear. "Relax," he said. "I won't harm you." He paused, his expression growing serious. "But if you accept my offer to serve as my maid, everything you have from that moment on belongs to me. Do you understand? If not, you're free to return down the stairs." Though his tone was soft, the weight behind his words was unmistakable. Nan Lixiang hesitated only a moment, then conviction steeled her resolve. To be chosen as the god's personal attendant was the highest honor, a privilege she had dared hope for only in her most secret dreams. In these uncertain times, serving Ethan promised safety and protection beyond measure. Memories of her harrowing trials still lingered in her mind, reminding her how precarious life could be. Rising to her knees, she met his gaze without flinching. "I will serve you, master," she answered, her voice firm. Ethan nodded, satisfaction shining in his eyes. He extended a hand, beckoning her to rise. Nan Lixiang accepted, stepping forward into the destiny she had just embraced. "Come over." Nan Lixiang stepped forward, her heart racing, not with fear this time, but with eager anticipation. Ethan regarded her coolly. The wheat-tanned skin, the poised posture, the Academy's novice village uniform all looked every bit as stunning as the rumors promised. Around them, dozens of characters' skins shimmered into being, each more mature and alluring than the last. Nan Lixiang, Kuchuan Shizuka, and the famed Poison Isle sister-in-law were the stars of the set. Even so, Ethan had never bothered to summon the less praised Miyamoto or Gao Cheng Saya. He found Miyamoto insufferable, and though Saya was undeniably beautiful, she simply didn't catch his eye. "Well," he said, voice flat, "I don't like this skin." His dismissal struck Nan Lixiang like a blast of winter wind. The hopeful light in her eyes darkened instantly, replaced by a surge of panic. In a realm governed by strength and reputation, even the smallest slight could seal one's fate. Nan Lixiang swallowed hard, her excitement curdling into dread, knowing deep down that Ethan's disfavor might already be the beginning of her downfall. Xunzi's heart hammered in her chest. To ordinary people, her sun-kissed, wheat-colored skin looked healthy, vibrant even. But in the eyes of the world god, it might as well be a fatal flaw. Panic seized her as nightmarish scenarios flashed through her mind. Expulsion from the sect, instant ostracism, or worse. Then she remembered the cold, unblinking numbers on her dossier. 619. There was no mistaking it, a scarlet record. Just when despair threatened to swallow her, Ethan's voice cut through the storm, warm and steady as sunrise. "Xunzi, you possess the spiritual strength of the autumn poetry scroll and the feather song technique." He spoke without a flicker of emotion, as if simply assigning today's training, never mind that he'd just overturned her fate. Relief washed over Xunzi, dispelling every shadow of fear. She dropped to one knee, her dark eyes shining with fierce loyalty and gratitude. "Yes, master." From the sidelines, Minami Rika stood frozen, her heart caught between astonishment and something she couldn't yet name. Minami Rika had steeled herself for a protracted, difficult negotiation with the world god, perhaps even feared she'd have to pay dearly for his approval. Yet to her utter surprise, the meeting proved almost effortless. She stole a glance at Saiko Busujima, who returned her look with a gentle, encouraging smile as if to say, "Relax, everything's going to be fine." "Don't be nervous," Saiko soothed, her voice calm and reassuring. "He's very approachable." Rika offered a wry, helpless smile. "Really? It's just we've never met before. Even if he seems easygoing, I can't help feeling tense. After all, my entire future hinges on his decision." Her words trembled on the edge of fear and guarded hope. In this world overrun by demons and chaos, she knew that from now on, everything she had belonged to Ethan. And after running the numbers 1,000 times in her mind, she'd concluded that serving as a maid to a powerful god was the safest, most sensible choice she could make. In this world, personal freedom feels fragile and inconsequential. To Minami Rika, such illusory liberties pale in comparison to the hard reality of survival and the imperative to protect those she holds dear. Chapter 1205, Nanlixiang's Shock. Minami Rika made a silent vow. No matter how grueling the road ahead, she would train herself until she became strong enough to protect the one she loved most. Only here, at the gates of the Tiangong Temple, could she find the power she so desperately needed. This determination sprang from her deep love and fierce sense of responsibility for Marikawa Shizuka, the gentle girl whose soft smile never failed to stir worry in Rika's heart. She refused to watch Shizuka suffer because of her own weakness, or to see her fall victim to the dangers of this world. When word spread that Minami Rika had been appointed the new divine maid of the Tiangong Temple, every faction that had once plotted against Marikawa Shizuka abruptly backed off. Some feared the might of Ethan, others dared not risk the wrath of the temple. In one bold stroke, Rika's decision erected an unbreakable shield around Shizuka. To ensure the news traveled fast and far, she even tasked Seiko Dokujima with personally broadcasting the announcement. With that, Minami Rika's loyalty became Marikawa Shizuka's greatest safeguard, upending every scheme in an instant and leaving adversaries quaking at the temple's doors. Ethan knew that if he vanished without a trace, everyone would assume he'd been wiped out, and Shizuka Marikawa would be left completely exposed. In this world, the powerless live or die at the whim of the powerful, and Ethan refused to let Shizuka become the next casualty. Even as his own strength grew, he couldn't split his focus between two crises, especially since Shizuka was likely already carrying his child. Besides, Saiko Busujima, God's handmaiden, had confirmed that this plan was true and necessary. With Ethan's new identity secured, Shizuka's life was about to be turned upside down. Her once peaceful days would give way to constant vigilance and round-the-clock protection. No family stepped up more decisively than the Busujimas, one of the three great powers in the Tiangong district. They personally sent a contingent to escort Shizuka into the heart of their territory, the safest refuge under the rule of the three major clans. The Busujima family's intervention was far from accidental. It marked the beginning of a new and far more dangerous chapter in Shizuka's life. After learning that Minami Rika had been appointed a maid of God, Shinichiro Busujima, head of the Busujima clan, immediately recognized a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. In their world, cultivating a strong bond with a maid of God was an invaluable advantage. Without hesitation, he ordered his finest retainers to escort Shizuka Marikawa to the Tengu district with the utmost courtesy. In the Tengu district, the Busujima, Hiratsuka, and Kasumigaoka families are revered as the three great houses. Even the most powerful sovereigns think twice before crossing them. Extending a hand in friendship would be a small price to pay. Gaining the favor of a maid of God, however, was a prize beyond measure. At the grand gates of the Tengu district, Shinichiro himself bowed deeply to Shizuka. His voice brimmed with respect and earnest intent. "Miss Shizuka, please be at ease. From this moment on, you are our most honored guest." Innocent and unaware of the stakes involved, Shizuka Marikawa offered a simple, grateful smile. "Ah, thank you." Nanlixiang's bold move had not only driven away would-be adversaries, but also finally secured her standing within the Tiangong Temple. As a maid of God, she owed unwavering loyalty to Ethan and needed to prove her own worth as well. Cultivating spiritual power was the only path forward, yet on this island nation steeped in mystery, every breakthrough had always been paid for in blood and sorrow. So when she heard Ethan's quiet question, "You can awaken spiritual power without ever fighting demons or monsters?" she stopped in her tracks. His words struck her like a stone cast into still water, sending shockwaves through her long-held beliefs. Here, where ancient legends and modern civilization coexisted, the existence of Bo, the spiritual and demonic powers, was no secret. But those who could truly master such power were as rare as they were revered, and Nan Lixiang had never imagined there could be any other way to awaken it. According to the latest, albeit incomplete figures, there are fewer than 10,000 spiritual power users in the entire island nation, a vanishingly small number when you consider the country's vast population. By comparison, demon power practitioners, whose ranks swelled past 10,000 thanks to Guhai Pharmaceuticals' demon power potion, appear more numerous. But their advantage is largely illusory. They're locked in a brutal struggle against demons and monsters on the blood-soaked battlefields of Kyoto. For them, each sunrise might well be their last. Hiratsuka Shishizuka followed Nan Lixiang's troubled gaze and recognized the question in her eyes, because she'd asked it herself only weeks before. Is it worth sacrificing millions of lives to produce a single spiritual power cultivator? Absolutely not. In theory, this cultivation method could spawn countless adepts, but in reality, it's a path only a rare few can walk. Ethan and Nan Lixiang stood before Hiratsuka Shizuka, who began, "Only those with exceptionally high spiritual aptitude can awaken spirit energy through this method. No one else stands a chance." She let that sink in, then continued, "By high spiritual aptitude, I mean spirit particle density at least 10,000 times greater than an average person's. That density makes their spirit energy not only more powerful, but nearly indestructible, like wielding both the sharpest spear and the sturdiest shield simultaneously. Picture an ordinary person's spirit energy as a thin, diffuse gas. You might sense it, but you can't shape or solidify it. In contrast, someone with high aptitude crystallizes their spirit energy into solid metal, hard as steel, capable of slicing through defenses or absorbing any blow." Nan Lixiang's breath caught. Even Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. Neither of them had realized the gulf between ordinary and true spiritual power could be so vast. Ethan stood quietly on the hillock, his gaze fixed on the distant city below. Behind him, Nan Lixiang and Hiratsuka exchanged somber looks. "In reality," Hiratsuka began, "there's no innate chasm between spiritual power and demonic energy. It all comes down to cultivation, time spent, techniques mastered, nothing more. Fundamentally, they're the same force shaped by different hands." Nan Lixiang's brow furrowed. "So anyone without exceptional gifts in the spirit arts is destined to be prey?" she asked, voice sharp with frustration. Hiratsuka nodded. "It's a cruel fact. Only 4 deities guard the celestial temple. How many spirit adepts do you think there are in our entire island nation, worldwide? And how many have you actually met, Ethan? The gulf is staggering." A bitter laugh escaped Nan Lixiang. Despite her own power to turn the tide, she'd remained idle after slaying Gatanja. Aside from a few ill-fated treasure hunts, each costing more lives than the spoils were worth, she'd done nothing to alter the balance. Too many had died, and none had claimed a single prize. Chapter 1206, Rika's Awakening. Morning light filtered through the practice room window, casting a soft glow on Minami Rika's determined face. She had dismissed every stray thought, centering herself entirely on cultivating the spiritual energy within. With each measured breath, her surroundings grew still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. At her side, Kasumigaoka Utaha and Hiratsuka Shizuka watched in respectful silence. Guided by their patient instruction, Rika reached inward, seeking that elusive spark of power she had long suspected lay dormant in her veins. At first, only a faint warmth stirred, like the gentle trickle of a melting brook in early spring. It was comforting but slight, so delicate she might have questioned its existence if she weren't concentrating so fully. Then, as she sank deeper into meditation, that fragile warmth began to swell. It pooled in her dantian, coalescing into a surging river of energy that raced through her meridians. A rush of exhilaration and awe swept through her. Her eyes flashed open as she inhaled sharply. "Is this spiritual power?" she whispered to herself. Rika's pulse thundered in her ears. Around her, the air seemed to crystallize, growing dense with the very essence she had just summoned. The power blossoming inside her felt colossal, ancient, untamed, and boundless. It was as though a volcano, long slumbering beneath the earth, had suddenly erupted, pouring forth molten energy that crackled with potential. Utaha stepped forward, her dark hair catching the sunlight. "You've done it, Rika," she said softly, pride and wonder mingling in her tone. "You've truly awakened your spiritual power." Shizuka offered a reassuring smile. "This is only the beginning. From here, you'll learn to refine and control it." Rika closed her eyes for a moment, letting the roaring current of power settle into a steady pulse. A quiet confidence replaced the initial shock. Whatever trials lay ahead, she knew she now had the strength to face them, and that this awakening would change everything. Utaha Kasumigaoka faced Minami Rika with calm confidence. The moment Rika first encountered spiritual power felt both strange and familiar, as if it had always been part of her, waiting just beyond her reach. Utaha's voice was soft but insistent. "Let your mind follow the flow of my spiritual power. Trace the pathway exactly as I guide you, and remember it. Spiritual energy isn't a still pond, it's a river. Only by letting it circulate fully through your body can you claim mastery over it." Rika closed her eyes and focused on Utaha's instructions. At first, her awareness swirled in confusion, as though she were wading through a heavy fog. But gradually a warm, gentle current awakened at her dantian, that energy center below the navel. She felt it sweep along the 8 extraordinary meridians, rising serenely to the Baihui point atop her head, then receding and pooling once more at her dantian. With each cycle, Rika sensed her blood quicken, heard, if only in her imagination, the tiny cells throughout her body cheering at their own renewal. The flow steadied, and with it came clarity. This was the first true taste of spiritual power, and she would never be the same again. "Through continuous training, you'll be able to strengthen your spiritual power," Utaha Kasumigaoka explained calmly. Minami Rika's eyes flew open, glowing with anticipation. "So, does this mean I'll finally become extraordinary?" Utaha's smile softened into something almost sad as she gently shook her head. "You're still naive. Right now you possess only raw spiritual energy, much like any newcomer who's just awakened. You have power, yes, but you don't know how to wield it. To those who are truly gifted, you're no more than a beast fueled by spiritual energy." Rika's excitement vanished in an instant, leaving behind a hollow sense of loss. Utaha continued, "Awakening your power was just the first step on this long road." Hiratsuka Shizuka nodded in agreement. "Cultivation isn't merely about awakening your energy," Shiguo said. "What matters most is learning how to control and apply it. There are 2 core principles, refining your power's properties and reshaping its form." Kasumigaoka Utaha's tone was crisp and to the point. "That's right, spiritual energy isn't static. You can reshape it at will. When I talk about shifting properties, I mean changing its elemental nature, fire, ice, lightning, and so on. Not only does that sharpen your attacks, it also gives you more strategic options in battle. Form shifting, meanwhile, is molding that energy into tangible shapes, a shield, a flying sword, even a rope, so you can adapt to any combat scenario." Minami Rika frowned, clearly puzzled by these 2 new concepts. Property shifting and form shifting? So spiritual energy can actually change its essence, like magic? Utaha smiled gently, as if she'd anticipated Rika's question. "Exactly. Spiritual energy is far more magical than most people realize, but mastering it takes time and patience. What you're going through now is simply the necessary path every spirit user must follow." "Don't rush for success," Hiratsuka Shizuka advised, her tone gentle but firm. "Stay calm, learn the fundamentals, and practice step by step." Noticing the lingering doubt in Minami Rika's eyes, Shizuka smiled softly, and then her body trembled as arcs of electricity began to dance around her. "Let me show you," she said. She lifted her hands deliberately. In an instant, brilliant blue lightning leapt from her fingertips, crackling through the room like distant thunder before a summer storm. The bolts spread outward, wrapping her in a fine sheath of electricity that pulsed with raw power. "This," she explained, "is my nature shift, thunder. Through training, I can convert my spiritual energy into the force of lightning. It extends my range and multiplies my destructive power." Although her voice remained calm, the sheer intensity of the crackling lightning made Minami Rika take an involuntary step backward. Shizuka's eyes glittered as she continued. What you were talking about, infusing spiritual energy directly into your fists, feet, or weapons, is certainly straightforward, but it's extremely inefficient, like using unrefined gunpowder to batter an enemy instead of harnessing it for a controlled, focused strike. Basic attacks can certainly deal damage, Utaha began, her voice cool and measured, but they're nowhere near the technique's full potential. Those of us who've mastered both nature transformation and form transformation think of it as possessing expert bomb-making knowledge can actually reshape spiritual energy into far more precise, efficient strikes. Rika sat forward, hanging on Utaha's every word. The concepts Utaha described shattered everything she thought she knew about spiritual power. She pictured herself wielding that kind of control, confident she could outmatch any opponent. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "All right," she said, voice trembling with anticipation. "What exactly is form transformation?" Shape change, Hiratsuka Shizuka began, is simply the art of molding spiritual energy into a chosen form or structure to achieve a particular effect. For example, I can concentrate lightning power into a razor-sharp blade, forge it into a solid shield, or even weave it into a complex formation diagram capable of long-range strikes, impenetrable defense, or support for allies. With a graceful wave of her hand, the crackling energy in the air instantly coalesced into a sword of pure lightning. Its keen point sliced through the atmosphere with a faint electric hiss. Then, as if guided by her thought alone, the blade dissolved into a halo of light that surrounded her, solidifying into an unbreakable lightning barrier. Minami Rika stared in awe, her heart pounding with excitement and respect. In that moment, she understood. To command both the nature and the shape of one's spiritual power was to master true artistry, an artistry that separated genuine extraordinary practitioners from ordinary spiritual users. Ethan paused in his observations and reflected on the difference between spiritual and demon arts. Practitioners of both paths could master an art, but their specialties diverged sharply. Spiritual users drew on outside energies, illusion, invisibility, elemental control, whereas demons reshaped their own flesh. Limbs might sharpen into blades, bones could swell into hulking masses, even vocal cords could become weapons. Strictly speaking, spiritual arts were not yet true arts in the fullest sense, but Ethan hadn't decided whether he would pursue ghost techniques or nin, so for now, the distinction was academic. Nearby, Nan Lixang trained with equal intensity, drilling basic hand seals and focusing her spirit energy until sweat stung her eyes. She, too, seemed to understand that mastering an art would be crucial for survival. As he watched her, Ethan's gaze drifted to the wider battlefield. Kyoto, once a glittering jewel of culture and commerce, had been reduced to a nightmarish arena, overrun by predators from other worlds. These creatures moved with terrifying speed and brute force, completely upsetting humanity's assumptions about warfare. Intrigued, Ethan quirked an eyebrow. "They've even built power armor to fight these things?" he murmured. His voice held a note of amusement, as if mocking both sides, humans for resorting to mechanized suits and the enemy for forcing such desperation. Yet beneath that teasing tone lay genuine respect for human ingenuity. The ruined streets echoed with distant roars and the thunder of armored units rolling into position. In this new age of war, survival would demand far more than bullets and blades. It would hinge on whose art could evolve fastest. Faced with an enemy that rendered conventional arms almost meaningless, humanity had no choice but to develop something entirely new: power armor. Astonishingly, what might have taken decades in peacetime was engineered in just a few years, driven by the urgency of a life-and-death conflict and the promise of vast profits. These towering exoskeletons stand 2 meters tall. Their sleek, aerodynamic silhouettes not only look impressive, they actually cut through the air, reducing drag and boosting agility on the battlefield. The armor's surface gleams with a cold metallic sheen, a clear sign of its cutting-edge construction. Inside that shine lies boron carbide ceramic composite, the military's so-called miracle material. This revolutionary composite has completely changed the game in impact resistance, eliminating the brittleness that plagued older armors when struck at high velocity. With a hardness of 50 GPa, it can shrug off direct hits from nearly any conventional weapon. Power armor isn't just our latest weapon, it's our best hope. Ethan stared at the digital readout, absorbing every detail. He knew that most naturally occurring rocks register barely 3 to 12 gigapascals in hardness, while conventional steel tops out around 20 GPa. That stark difference explained why the advanced titanium alloy earmarked for his armor carried such a staggering price tag. Normally, it was reserved for critical components on armed helicopters, the only application that justifies its cost in peacetime. But this was no ordinary project. The super individual program wasn't governed by conventional cost-benefit equations. Its purpose went far beyond mere battlefield efficiency. At its core lay the drive to unearth and maximize the latent potential of superhumans, warriors who would not only stand as humanity's first line of defense against unknown threats, but also spearhead the next wave of technological and tactical breakthroughs. Every inch of the power armor was a testament to that ambition, a marriage of cutting-edge science and painstaking craftsmanship. Take the titanium alloy shield, for example. Although the base material was already prized for its high strength-to-weight ratio, engineers enhanced its toughness and impact resistance through a series of advanced heat treatments and precision forging techniques. The result was a defensive barrier light enough for swift movement, steady yet formidable enough to withstand the deadliest blows. In Ethan's mind, this wasn't armor, it was a new chapter in human evolution. Ethan ran his gauntleted hand along the edge of his power armor's shield, testing its energy dispersal field. Engineered to shrug off conventional ballistics, it could even withstand and partially neutralize high-velocity kinetic strikes. With this virtually indestructible barrier in place, he knew he was as protected as any soldier could hope to be on today's battlefields. Strapped to his hip was a cubic boron nitride bonded cutting knife, Ethan's go-to tool for precision work. Cubic boron nitride, CBN, is second only to diamond in hardness, and its exceptional thermal stability means the blade holds its edge even under intense heat. Using advanced bonding techniques, microscopic CBN particles are fused into a metal matrix, creating a blade that remains razor-sharp and remarkably durable. In combat, it can slice through enemy armor plates or fry delicate electronics. In rescue operations, it performs surgical cuts with equal ease. Beyond these physical defenses and blades, Ethan's suit bristled with high-tech weaponry. Twin flamethrowers were mounted beneath each forearm, capable of projecting searing streams of incendiary gel. On the opposite wrist, a liquid nitrogen sprayer could freeze targets solid in seconds, useful for immobilizing hostiles or rapidly creating makeshift barricades of ice. Together, these systems, the shield, the CBN knife, and the complementary incendiary and cryogenic arms, made Ethan a one-man arsenal, ready for whatever the mission might throw at him. Ethan keyed his power armor into combat mode and brought up the HUD weapon diagnostics. 3 distinct systems glowed on his display, each optimized for a different threat. He ran a mental checklist as the nano-servos hummed to life beneath his armored skin. First came the flamethrower attachment. Using high-pressure injection, it atomizes fuel and oxidizer before igniting them in a blistering jet of flame. Up close, it inflicts devastating burns. At mid-range, the heat waves blur an enemy's vision and drive them into disarray. Ethan appreciated its raw, unrelenting power, ideal for clearing clustered opponents or flushing out entrenched foes. Next was the liquid nitrogen sprayer, Ethan's countermeasure against heavily armored or fast-moving targets. At the flip of a switch, it unleashes a bone-chilling cloud that can freeze exposed gear and slow mechanical systems to a crawl. In many cases, the sudden cold stops vehicles in their tracks or sends mechanical drones spinning into controlled shutdowns, giving Ethan the opening he needs to finish them off. Finally, the shoulder-mounted, heat-source tracking missile launcher sealed the deal for long-range engagements. Advanced infrared detectors lock onto enemy heat signatures, while onboard guidance calculates an optimal flight path. The missile darts through the air at blistering speed, intelligently maneuvering around obstacles to strike its target with surgical precision. Whether dealing with a lone sniper in a distant tower or a charging war machine on the horizon, this system turns Ethan's power armor into a one-man long-range strike force. With all weapon systems online, Ethan squared his shoulders, took a deep breath, and stepped into the fray, ready for whatever the battlefield might throw at him. Chapter 1: Power Armor and the New Face of Warfare. On today's ever-shifting battlefields, one weapon has risen to prominence as a genuine game-changer: the heat-seeking bomb. Deployed at precisely the right moment, it can deliver a near-fatal strike against any target. Yet alongside this devastating munition, another marvel of military engineering has emerged: power armor. Though extremely costly, these powered suits excel in missions where traditional heavy assets simply can't go. Consider a modern large cruiser. Its massive guns, thick plating, and long-range missiles make it the undisputed heavyweight of naval engagements. But building one ship consumes enough RCs to produce hundreds of individual power armor frames. Despite that disparity in cost, each fills a distinct niche. Cruisers dominate the open seas, projecting raw firepower and absorbing enemy barrages. Power armor, by contrast, shines in special operations, counter-terrorism raids, urban street combat, and any scenario demanding stealth, flexibility, and close-quarters lethality. Engineers developing these suits faced three core challenges. 1. Power supply. A battlefield suit can't be tethered to bulky cables or rely on low-capacity batteries. Developers had to create compact, high-output reactors capable of sustaining the armor's servo motors, integrated sensors, and onboard computer systems for hours at a stretch. 2. Heat dissipation. A suit's reactor, servos, and advanced electronics generate tremendous waste heat. Without an effective means of shedding that heat, a pilot risks overheating, both the suit and himself. The solution came in the form of an intricate thermal management network woven through the armor's framework. Microfluidic channels carry coolant to hotspots, phase-change materials absorb sudden temperature spikes, and external vents expel excess heat invisibly, preserving the wearer's stealth. 3. Terrain adaptability. From crumbling cityscapes to dense jungles and steep mountain trails, the armor had to perform everywhere. Designers equipped the suits with modular foot and limb attachments, magnetic grips for urban steel structures, retractable grousers for soft or uneven ground, and shock-absorbing joints to cushion vertical drops. Together, these breakthroughs gave birth to an entirely new class of soldier, one able to infiltrate a fortified compound under the cover of darkness, then outfight and outlast conventional infantry. For pilots like Ethan, the transition from cloak and dagger operations to full-scale urban warfare was nothing short of revolutionary. He knew that while cruisers still ruled the waves, power armor was destined to redefine ground combat for decades to come. Thanks to its liquid cooling circuit and integrated heat sinks, excess heat is rapidly dissipated, preventing any performance loss from overheating. The rise of Transcendence has opened an entirely new field for power armor applications. These artificially created superhumans wield spiritual and demonic energies far beyond what ordinary people can muster. But without an effective way to channel that power, their true potential often goes unrealized. Power armor provides the perfect solution, offering a platform on which Transcendence can fuse their inner energies with cutting-edge technology, achieving an unprecedented leap in combat capability. Chapter 1207: Power Armor Core. The front line, where humanity's forces clash head to claw with the demons, was on the verge of tipping in mankind's favor. The reason? The silent arrival of towering exoskeletons known as power armor. Each suit, over 2 meters tall, gleamed like a futuristic warbeast, cold, angular, and bristling with hidden strength. Built from advanced alloys, these armors shrug off enemy blows with ease. Inside, a cutting-edge soul energy regulator converts the pilot's spiritual power into pure operating energy. Though the suit cannot fire that power as a direct attack, it channels every ounce of its wearer's soul force into speed, reflexes, and brute strength, transforming an ordinary soldier into a one-man battering ram. In this world, spiritual power is the root of all extraordinary abilities. Ordinary folk can only dream of it, but lieutenants who have scraped together a scrap of dog-tier cultivation hold the key. It is these fledgling cultivators, young officers who have just crossed the threshold of true soul strength, who serve as the best pilots for the power armor. Their nascent spiritual reserves, once honed and harnessed by the suit's regulator, yield performance far beyond any conventional soldier. Amid the roar of battle, These armored giants stride forward, each footstep shaking the earth, each sweep of an armored fist sending demons flying. With the power armor core on the field, humanity has a fighting chance to reclaim the front. Lieutenant Ethan sprang back, sleek in his black combat uniform, and vaulted into the open cockpit of his power armor as if it were second nature. The entire battlefield fell silent for a heartbeat. Then came the mechanical chorus of clicks and whirs as the suit's plates snapped into place, sealing him inside. Instantly, the armor's spiritual power regulation system roared to life, converting Ethan's own spiritual energy into raw mechanical strength. His limbs moved with the effortless agility of an unarmored soldier, only now, each punch and step carried the force to shatter steel. He was one of humanity's brightest hopes. "Clear the way." Ethan's command crackled through the helmet's amplifier. Two elite troopers flanking him surged forward. In their gauntleted hands, they gripped bonded cubic boron nitride blades, harder than any forged metal and second only to diamond on the Mohs scale. These knives could slice through tank armor like paper, making them the perfect countermeasure against the thick, plated hides of the reptilian monsters overrunning their positions. As Ethan and his vanguard stormed ahead, the alien reptiles recoiled in genuine fear for the first time. Against these powered warriors, the beast's brutal strength was suddenly and decisively no match. Ethan braced himself as the reptilian horde charged. Dozens of clawed heads lunged toward him, jaws snapping, scales glittering in the dim light. They roared in unison, confident that sheer numbers would overwhelm any lone defender. But Ethan stood firm. With a swift motion, he drew his razor-sharp combat blade and activated his power armor's reinforced servos. The air itself seemed to tear as the blade whistled through it. One creature sprang at him, but Ethan met its attack head-on, his knife driving through the top of its skull with a sickening crack. The beast collapsed, split cleanly at the waist. Blood and viscera spattered across the ground in a grisly arc. Before the others could recoil, Ethan spun on his heel. His enhanced strength sent him surging forward at lightning speed. He swept his blade in a wide arc, and two more reptiles fell in a rain of crimson. Their limbs were severed, bones shattering under the power armor's amplified strike. Every movement was effortless, every blow precise. What had once been fearsome predators now crumpled like lambs before the slaughter. Despite all this, Ethan felt the familiar ache of limitation. Unlike true psychics, those rare spiritual extraordinaires who could summon energy from within, his artificial enhancements could not channel spiritual power. He could not unleash psychic blasts or shatter his foes with will alone. That drawback stung, especially when pitched in so savage a fight. Yet even as he wiped gore from his visor, Ethan knew the tide was turning in humanity's favor. Power armor had transformed ordinary soldiers into walking fortresses, where once the balance of strength lay with the monsters, now men, backed by steel and servo mechanisms, could stand toe-to-claw with any supernatural threat. With a final, resonant clang, the last reptile toppled. Ethan paused, blade dripping, chest rising and falling under his armored chest plate. Around him, the battlefield fell silent, save for the distant echoes of retreating creatures. In that hush, Ethan allowed himself a grim smile. Hope had arrived with the armor, and as long as they held the line, humanity still had a fighting chance. Ethan's power armor was born to correct humanity's natural shortcomings in strength and speed. While it still relies on conventional fossil fuels and onboard electrical systems, the true innovation lies in its ability to tap directly into the pilot's spiritual energy. By converting that inner power into a continuous flow of kinetic force, the suit amplifies every movement. Punches land with the weight of a wrecking ball, and footsteps strike like thunder. In this armor, a single soldier becomes an unstoppable humanoid weapon. Flanking Ethan and his fellow power-armored troops are the armed exotics, specialist fire support units. Each carries an oversized fuel tank strapped to the back, filled with a specially compressed, ultra-high combustion agent. At the press of a trigger built into their gauntlets, precision nozzles mounted above their knuckles unleash a 40 to 50 meter column of flame. The inferno is so intense it can reduce enemy formations to ash in seconds. This devastating flamethrower system wasn't conceived in a lab, but forged on the front lines of the American Island War. There, Engineers and soldiers refined the design through hard-won experience, ensuring that today's armed exotics can rain hellfire down on any battlefield, and do so with deadly accuracy. Ethan's power armor had first been field-tested against the island army's hidden tunnels, caves, and bunkers, and its stunning success had secured its place in military history. Now, in this demon-infested land, it shone anew as a devastating weapon against the reptile hordes. Blazing infernos swept the battlefield like the god of death's scythe, ruthlessly reaping lives. Under the withering heat, the reptilian warriors fell back, desperately seeking cover from the searing flames. Yet no bunker or cavern could withstand the relentless advance of those clad in power armor. Ethan raised his titanium alloy shield just in time to intercept a crushing blow from a massive reptile's tail. Sparks flew as steel met scaled flesh, but the armor held firm. With a swift pivot, he drew his bonded cubic boron nitride cutting blade. The weapon whistled through the air like a bolt of lightning, slicing the creature cleanly in two. Blood sprayed across the scorched earth, and the air filled with the acrid tang of iron. Ethan surveyed the retreating reptile survivors and allowed himself a grim smile. "Power armor really is something else," he muttered, wiping his blade on the creature's remains. In the rear command center, a senior officer studied the constantly updating battle data on the monitors and couldn't hide his admiration. Each screen showed real-time readings for the 10 power armors in the field, energy reserves, system status, and the wearer's vital signs, without a single malfunction so far. Watching these armored troops outperform every expectation, the High Command realized that power armor's true potential far exceeds its current deployment. They immediately ordered an expansion of the production line, determined to outfit as many soldiers as possible and boost overall battlefield effectiveness. The introduction of power armor promises to tip the balance decisively in humanity's favor against supernatural threats. Today, fewer than 10,000 psychics exist, and 99% of them are still at the lowest dog rank. But once these operatives don the new suits, their combat capabilities will surge to an entirely new level. Even the lowest dog-class psychics can punch above their weight once they suit up in power armor, fighting at the level of a weak wolf class, or sometimes even a full wolf class. Wolf class and strong wolf class operatives become even more unpredictable with this technological boost. In some cases, they approach true tiger class strength. This edge is humanity's only hope against the supernatural hordes. Ethan was convinced that if they could deploy enough power-armored troops, they'd be able to carve a path through this blasted landscape and unearth the legendary treasure buried on the Kyoto battlefield. Chapter 1208, Human Counterattack. Ethan stood before the holoprojector as the final tactical overview flickered to life. The data scrolling across the display detailed a single, tantalizing fact. Hidden among the enemy's stockpiles were legendary artifacts, machines said to be capable of turning the tide of the war. If they could seize those treasures and bring them into human hands, it would spell a decisive breakthrough on the battlefield. The most coveted of these prizes was the so-called power armor. Ever since its introduction, this revolutionary war machine had redefined combat. Its composite alloys and energy-dampening fields offered unprecedented protection, while its servo-assisted joints granted pilots agility beyond human limits. For every army that fielded even a handful of these suits, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. Yet power armor came with staggering drawbacks. Its manufacture demanded rare materials and precision engineering, so costly that even the wealthiest nations could scarcely afford more than a few units. Operating and maintaining the suits required highly trained technicians and physically elite pilots. Without proper handling, a suit could become little more than an immobile hunk of metal, especially in open terrain dominated by tank columns and artillery barrages. That exclusivity, however, was precisely what made power armor so alluring. It was a soldier's Ferrari, a sovereign's secret weapon, an extension of its wearer's strength and skill. Pilots who mastered the system transcended the ordinary limits of flesh and blood, transforming into walking fortresses on the front lines. Now, with rumors that dozens of these suits lay dormant in the enemy's depots, Ethan knew humanity faced a narrow window of opportunity. If his forces could break through the lines, capture those armories intact, and unlock the secrets of power armor production, they would gain an edge no alien armada could match. He closed the briefing. Outside the command tent, the wind carried the acrid tang of scorched earth and the distant thunder of artillery. The counterattack was about to begin, and with it, the chance to reclaim a future once thought lost. Unlike traditional infantry, these artificially enhanced super soldiers have driven the war to unprecedented levels of intensity and scale. To keep pace, the research teams have been granted record-breaking budgets. Every new grant fuels the development of cutting-edge power armor, each technological leap redefining the battlefield. Though money can seem mundane, in this age it wields extraordinary power. With ample funding, scientists dare to pursue ideas once dismissed as impossible. In their laboratories, novel alloys, advanced energy cores, and AI-assisted control systems proliferate. Ingeniously integrated into the latest suits of armor, these innovations continually raise performance to new heights. Each successive armor prototype represents the ultimate fusion of technology and firepower, and as more of these super soldiers join the front lines, the conflict grows ever more complex and lethal. In the roar of detonations, missiles fell like deadly raindrops, tearing one building after another into smoldering ruins. 10-meter-high columns of smoke and flame rose as if ushering in doomsday itself. Through the choking haze, a colossal six-legged predator burst from the wreckage with a bone-rattling roar. It moved like an armored juggernaut, each step shattering pavement and toppling walls. Wherever it went, debris flew and innocents fell. "Over here!" came a challenge, cutting through the chaos. Out of the smoke strode Ethan, clad head to toe in power armor. His visor glowed faintly in the gloom, and in his left hand he hefted a reinforced alloy shield taller than himself. He flexed in the exoskeleton's hydraulics, readying every servo and piston for impact. Ethan drew himself up and bellowed taunts at the charging beast. "Come on, you overgrown lizard! Look what I've got!" The predator snarled, its monstrous jaws snapping, but it paused, its attention snagged by the defiant figure before it. Abandoning the smaller targets scattered around the street, it locked its burning eyes on Ethan and charged with terrifying speed, intent on crushing, tearing, devouring the one who dared oppose it. Ethan steadied his shield, bracing every limb of the power armor. The ground shook as the creature barreled toward him, and in that moment, between steel and fang, only one outcome mattered. Ethan lunged forward, blade raised, just as a thunderous crack split the air. A 40mm tungsten alloy, armor-piercing round tore from the barrel at supersonic speed and slammed into the giant crawling predator's forelimb. This heavy-duty anti-armor sniper shell, nearly as thick as a carrot, was built for taking down the extraordinary, and it ripped through the creature's chitinous hide and sinew as easily as a hot knife through butter. The force of the impact shattered bone instantly. Blood and shredded tissue sprayed outward in a crimson arc, leaving a gaping, basin-sized wound at the joint. The projectile didn't stop there. It bored through the cement sidewalk beneath like a drill bit, hollowing out a crater before burying itself deep in the concrete. Target neutralized, the sniper's calm, authoritative voice crackled through Ethan's radio. A moment later, glass shattered as the window of a nearby building exploded inward. Shards rained onto the street, and in the jagged frame stood the silhouette of their savior, the sniper who had arrived just in time. Ethan exhaled, lowering his blade. The monster lay still, and for the first time in minutes, the city's dreadful silence felt almost peaceful. Ethan stood motionless amid the chaos, his power armor's digital camouflage plating blending into the ruined landscape. Dark paint streaked his face, breaking up his silhouette even further. Across his broad shoulders rested an anti-material sniper cannon so monstrously large that its very presence seemed to warp the air around it. Every time he fired, the rifle unleashed a deafening crack and a blast of recoil that rattled the armor's joints, and yet the weapon's raw destructive force split fortified walls and overturned armored vehicles as if they were paper. A wounded leviathan of a crawler beast, its scaled hide cracked and bleeding, reared up, claws gouging the cracked concrete beneath it. For a moment, its eyes dimmed under the pain, then flared furious as it lunged forward again. Ethan didn't hesitate. He braced himself and shoved out his massive shield arm, the the servos whirring with unstoppable force. The plated barrier slapped against the creature's armored skull like a battering ram, metal shrieking against chitin. Sparks erupted where shield met scale, and the ground shuddered beneath the impact. That crushing blow was all Ethan needed. The reaction torque spun him around, bringing his shoulder-mounted cannon to bear on the only soft spot he could see, the beast's armored neck. Simultaneously, his free hand drew the combat blade at his hip, its monomolecular edge gleaming in the dust-filled air. With unerring precision, he fired the cannon. A thunderous boom ripped through the battlefield as a high-velocity round tore into the creature's throat. At the same instant, Ethan slashed upward with the blade, severing tendon and sinew in one fluid motion. The crawler's roar faltered, then died, and its massive body collapsed in a cloud of debris. Silence settled for a heartbeat. Ethan stood over the fallen titan, chest heaving behind his helmet, every circuit in his armor still humming with residual energy. The battle raged on around him, but for this single moment, he had been the Reaper, and the field was his. No mistakes, systems green. Sequence 619, fire. Like the blade of a colossal cutter, the squad's biocannon sliced through the armored carapace and muscle of the giant crawler predator. The monster uttered a sorrowful wail as its massive body crumpled to the ground, sending up a cloud of dust. Amidst the ruins, several power-armored soldiers held their ground. The sinking sun stretched, their silhouettes long and thin, and the metal of their exosuits reflected a cold, steely gleam in the fading light. Their target, a newly staggered crawler predator, towered before them. The creature was as large as a small building, its body sheathed in a thick, dark brown carapace studded with interlocking spines, nature's own defensive arsenal. Its eyes burned like coals, alive with primal rage, and viscous drool dripped from its maw, filling the air with a nauseating stench. "Ready in 3, 2, 1, attack!" The squad leader's voice crackled through the helmet comm. In an instant, a chorus of weapon fire tore through the twilight, the soldiers' precision-guided volleys striking the beast's flanks as they pressed their advantage. Dust and debris swirled around them, the last light of day glinting on armed soldiers determined to vanquish the monstrous threat. Ethan's command crackled over the comms, and immediately the alloy spears mounted on the power armor suits began to spin, whining low like restless stallions straining at their reins. These weren't ordinary javelins, but state-of-the-art precision weapons. Each spear housed a miniature hydraulic motor that, on command, could accelerate to blistering rotational speeds, sharpening its cutting edge and increasing penetration tenfold. Within seconds, the whirring grew intense, the spears transforming into silver cyclones of pure kinetic force. With ruthless efficiency, they drove toward the giant reptilian predator's most vulnerable points. Bolstered by their inhumanly enhanced physiques and the extra power supplied by the armor, the soldiers thrust with every ounce of strength they had, turning the whirling spears into deadly extensions of their will. Chapter 12:9, A Protracted Battle. Drillhead cannons whirred in a lethal dance, their serrated barrels glinting like scythes of death. Each rotating tip sought out the hidden vulnerabilities of the giant crawling predators, those seemingly insignificant gaps that carried the power to fell even the fiercest beast. To most creatures, such weak points would go unnoticed, but in the hands of a skilled warrior, they became the key to victory. The firing speed of the drill guns was astonishing, so fast that the naked eye could barely follow the spinning barrels. A sharp scream split the air as each shot carved a mini vortex, foreshadowing the destruction ready to erupt. At the forefront stood Ethan, leader of the power-armored strike team. His exoskeleton suit represented the cutting edge of military technology, fusing impenetrable plating with a high-output power amplifier. The result, strength and agility far beyond any unaugmented human, transforming Ethan into a one-man juggernaut on the battlefield. Yet even with such gear, Ethan knew this fight would demand everything he had. The earth shook under the predator's advance, their chitinous limbs clawing at the ground in eager anticipation. With every calculated shot and every measured step, he braced himself for the protracted struggle ahead, because here, precision and resolve would decide who survived and who became just another casualty of war. Ethan's drill gun bit into the predator's armored shell with a savage whine. foul, metallic ichor spurted free, filling the air with the stench of blood and oil. Each turn of the barrel sheared through sinew and organs alike, the dull crack of tearing muscle echoing in Ethan's ears. The weapon felt alive, guided by an invisible force that drove it ever deeper into the creature's bulk. Tough muscle and tangled entrails yielding as easily as butter under a red-hot blade. In that instant, every combat drill Ethan had endured, countless repetitions that once felt rote, merged into a single deadly dance. The beast answered with a roar that shook the ground, a raw, primal cry of fury and desperation. Its body convulsed, trying to wrench free from this brutal embrace. But the spinning drill did more than carve flesh. It pumped precise vibrations into the predator's nervous system, slowing its reflexes and draining its strength. Ethan felt the creature's life force ebbing away, its resistance collapsing. Now, rise. His words were barely a growl, yet through the loudspeakers of his powered armor, they thundered across the battlefield. Ethan's arms bulged as the power armor flooded his muscles with energy, every inch of his skin thrumming with untapped strength. In a heartbeat, he hoisted the colossal crawler predator, an armored behemoth weighing dozens of tons, straight off the cracked pavement. In that instant, man and machine fused into one extraordinary force, manifesting power that felt almost mythical. Boom! The predator slammed back down onto the street with earth-shattering force. Gravel and shards of concrete erupted outward like a deadly rain, while web-like fissures radiated from the impact point, setting the entire block trembling. The creature's massive shell, once touted as indestructible, shattered into fragments of crustacean-like plating and splintered bone, strewn across the cratered asphalt. Beside him, the heavy machine gun came to life with a low, mechanical roar. Its long ammunition belt snaked forward like a black dragon, feeding round after round into the weapon's ravenous chamber. Locked and loaded, Ethan stood ready, the battlefield awaiting the storm he was about to unleash. Ethan steps onto the shattered pavement and freezes. Before him stands an entire squad of exceptionally trained soldiers, each wearing exogenous bone power armor that gleams like forged steel in the pale sunlight. Some of them clutch dual Gatling guns, those massive barrels seeming impossibly light in their hands, each footfall powered, precise, and utterly fearless. Others sling sniper rifles wrapped in tangle of detonation cord, their Lie-En figures coiled like hunting cats, every muscle defined beneath the armor's plating. They could have walked straight out of an action movie, part Rambo, part hardened warlord. Above, a reconnaissance drone soars like a mechanical eagle, its rotors whistling against the wind. Outfitted with high-definition optics, it picks apart the wreckage of the city block below, ensuring no alleyway or rooftop goes unseen. Commanders feed live video back to their tactical screens, shifting squads on a whim to exploit any weakness. From his position behind a crumbled wall, Ethan watches the mapping overlay redraw itself in real time, directing armored columns and sniper pairs with brutal efficiency. A crackling voice comes through Ethan's earpiece. Monsters we're facing, just keep getting stronger. The commander's tone is strained, a rare note of worry slipping in. This big one? I'm convinced it isn't some random beast. Ethan's heart hammers at the thought. Whatever this creature is, it's drawn every last expert and every ounce of cutting-edge gear the military has to offer. And now, it's his turn to join the battle. It's adapting to our tactics, Ethan muttered, glancing at his HUD. Even with humanity's full might thrown into the fray, the nest giant's spawn continued to overwhelm us. Every soldier we lost was reclaimed by those colossal beasts, subjected to some unknown transformation, and reborn as an even deadlier adversary. Our scientists worked around the clock, desperate to devise a countermeasure, but each victory in the lab was swiftly negated by the creature's relentless evolution. We were caught in a vicious cycle with no end in sight. Above the ruined city, the sky hung heavy with acrid smoke, and a sickly gray light filtered through the clouds. Ethan picked his way through the wreckage in his power armor, every step crunching over cracked concrete and splintered wood. The soft whir of his suit's servos was the only sound besides the distant, unsettling echoes of battle. At the head of the column, Captain Jack led the squad with practiced confidence. His armor was etched with battle scars, pitted dents from shrapnel, scorched plates where plasma fire had licked his frame, each imperfection a testament to his survival. He paused atop a fallen girder, scanning the desolate expanse with steely eyes, ready for whatever horrors might emerge next. Ethan's gaze was as sharp as an eagle's, sweeping every shadow of the tunnel to guard against surprises. His combat visor flashed a readout. Bioform, insect threat level 619, classification, unknown species. No mistake, this was something new. In that instant, a creature lunged from the darkness ahead. It was enormous, vaguely arachnid in shape, but utterly unlike any insect they'd encountered. Instead of a hard exoskeleton, its segmented body was sheathed in a strange, translucent membrane that seemed to ripple with its movements. 6 razor-sharp legs glinted in the dim light, each blade-like joint catching a flash of cold steel. "Be careful!" Jack's warning echoed off the tunnel walls. Ethan's team sprang into action. Powered armor servos whirred as they fanned out, forming a tight encirclement around the unknown monster. HUD sensors clicked online, ammunition counters spun to full capacity. A voice crackled in Ethan's earpiece. Target locked, ready to engage. A gloved finger hovered lightly over the trigger, awaiting the captain's order. The tunnel fell silent for a heartbeat. Then the battle began. Ethan's team squeezed the triggers, sending bullets streaming out like a sudden downpour. But in that instant, the creature simply vanished, as if it had dissolved into thin air, leaving nothing behind but stunned disbelief. Ethan stared at the blank sweep of the radar and life sign monitor. The hostile target they'd been tracking had simply vanished, leaving no trace behind. What just happened?" One of his squad mates whispered, disbelief lacing his voice. "Stay focused," Ethan ordered, his tone steady despite the tension. "Alert level red. Scan for any sign, movement, heat signature, anything." Ethan adjusted his helmet's HUD, fanning out the sensors. Nothing. The tunnel lay silent and empty. Then the stillness shattered. A deafening boom echoed off the walls as a monstrous strike slammed into the trailing power suit. The concussive force ripped open the hardened ceramic composite shell in an instant, cleaving a jagged maw into the armor's right shoulder. His squadmate's scream cut off abruptly. A life sign blinked out on Ethan's display. "It's not a joke," another trooper yelled, backing away. "This armor, this suit cost as much as a cruiser. We've fought every nightmare out there, but nothing that can do this." Ethan gritted his teeth beneath his visor. They'd grown complacent, believing their firepower and protection were absolute. Now that illusion lay in ruins. "Hold your positions," Ethan barked. "Return fire only if you can't avoid it. We find that thing before it finds us." The squad formed a tight semicircle, weapons up, eyes darting through the darkness. Ethan keyed his radio. "Command, this is Alpha Team. We've got an unidentified predator with armor-piercing capabilities, requesting immediate extraction or heavy backup." Static crackled. Then, "Copy that, Alpha. Support en route. Hold your ground." Ethan checked his ammo count. He took a steadying breath. Whoever, or whatever, had just attacked them wasn't finished yet. But neither was he. Tonight, they would learn just how far their steel would bend before it broke, and they would be the ones to push back. "Hold steady. Don't break formation." Jack's voice thundered through the roar of gunfire and pounding rain. As squad leader, he knew that even a moment's panic could spell disaster. He scanned the smoky, rain-slicked ruin around them, eyes flashing like twin searchlights as he hunted for any clue to the creature's attack pattern. The thing moved like a nightmare, appearing 1 second on their left flank, vanishing the next on their right. Every strike was precise, deadly, almost as if it could anticipate their every move. "It's too fast!" Corporal Mason's cry cut through the chaos. A jagged crack ran down the side of his power armor, crimson warning lights flaring from the fissure. He stumbled, struggling to keep his footing against the machine's relentless assault. At the comm station, Ethan slammed a fist against the console, fingers darting over the controls. The tracking reticle flickered erratically, refusing to lock on the phantom target. He grit his teeth, spare cables whipping like angry snakes in the wind. "I can't get a lock. Nothing's responding," he shouted, panic fraying his voice. His teammates gaped at him, rifles at the ready, while Jack barked another order. "Keep moving. Don't give it an opening." But as the rain sluiced down and the monster's shadow flickered at the edge of Ethan's vision, even that seemed like a faint hope. The creature lurked just beyond their line of sight, waiting for its next chance to strike. A single sentence crashed over the team like a bucket of icy water, dragging the already taut tension down into despair. Then came a thunderous crack. The reinforced plating of one player's power armor shattered entirely. Stripped of protection, he had just enough time for a strangled scream before the monster lunged and swallowed him whole. Panic rippled through the squad like a contagion. In the shadows, Sakurajima Mai pressed herself into the corner of a crumbling building, peering through jagged window frames. She was impossibly slender, with long black hair cascading to her waist, the strands by her face curled inward in soft rings. Her features were delicate, high cheekbones, large eyes that seemed perpetually half-lidded in a bored, almost seductive indifference. Two simple clips kept her side-swept bangs from slipping into her face. Though she wore the same standard-issue uniform as the others, it looked haphazard on her. The tailored jacket swallowed her narrow shoulders, its sleeves bunched around her wrists. The skirt barely reached mid-thigh, and her legs, sheathed in sheer black pantyhose, only emphasized how model-like her figure seemed. Every element of her attire felt as if it had been borrowed, and badly. Yet even amidst the ruin and the horror, Mai's calm, detached beauty made her stand apart from the rest. Sakurajima Mai was in her 3rd year of high school, yet her uniform no longer fit. She couldn't understand what was happening to her, and worse, no one else could see her. As a former idol, Mai had been used to bright lights, roaring applause, and the feeling of being sought after by countless fans. But then the monsters came, and everything she knew crumbled. The once bustling streets of Tokyo lay in ashes, devastated by the kaiju, towering beasts mankind viewed as harbingers of ruin. Though humanity's own gods eventually slew the creatures, they left behind a trail of destruction that destroyed livelihoods, including Mai's. Losing her job was painful, but it wasn't the worst blow. What terrified her most was the realization that she had effectively vanished. In this new world of monsters and supernatural forces, Mai had become invisible. Neither humans nor otherworldly beings could sense her presence. It was as if the entire planet had forgotten she ever existed. She had become a ghost, able to watch the world go by, yet utterly unable to join in. Ethan pressed his hands over his ears, trying desperately to block out the deafening staccato of gunfire. Not long ago, he'd stood in the spotlight, confident, unshakable, but now he was crouched in the shadows of a crumbling building. All he wanted was to shout and make himself known. Instead, each time he opened his mouth, it felt like his voice would shatter under the relentless boom of the weapons around him. Why me? He wondered, his heart pounding so hard it threatened to burst his ribs. Through the roar of combat, he barely registered the crackling of his radio. Over and over he muttered, Alpha, 1-1. Bravo, 619. Alpha, 1-1. But there was no reply. Just the pounding of artillery and the distant, eerie echo of orders barked in tongues he didn't understand. Bullets rained down like hail, but Ethan couldn't tell where they were coming from. He and his squad wove through shattered walls and collapsed pillars, ducking every split second they could. One stray round gouged a chunk out of the floor, sending fragments of concrete flying. Another tore through a support beam, and sending splinters into the smoky air. Each time, he felt the heat of the blast against his armor, and each time, he forced himself to keep moving. He darted across a debris-strewn courtyard, heart thudding so loudly he swore the enemy must hear it. Every footfall on the jagged stones reminded him of a deer cornered by wolves. No safe path, only fleeting chances to dodge or dive. The acrid stench of burning metal and gunpowder hung heavy, mingling with the choking dust that clogged his throat and made his lungs burn. At last, Ethan dropped behind a shattered wall, pressing his back against the rough concrete. He tasted grit in his mouth and felt sweat trickle down his spine. He'd never been in a fight like this. The men attacking them weren't using ordinary rounds. Their power armor spit out full caliber, World War II-grade ammunition, bullets so large and so fast they punched through standard cover like paper. Ethan's pulse raced, but he forced himself to breathe. He wiped a hand across his forehead, flinching as grit scraped over a fresh cut. Somewhere ahead, the gunfire intensified, as if the unseen enemy had closed in even tighter. Ethan clenched his teeth and tapped his radio one more time. Alpha, 1-1. Bravo, request immediate extraction. "We're pinned down." Silence answered him, only the thunder of bullets and the rumble of distant explosions. Ethan steeled himself. He could feel the weight of those approaching rounds, felt the power behind them. But he knew he had to move, had to stay alive. Taking a deep breath, he pushed himself to his feet and slipped out from cover, ready to face whatever came next. She could feel each bullet's wind whistling by and the thud of them striking the walls. Every shot reminded her that death was only an arm's length away. "Ah!" Mai Sakurajima screamed, pounding her legs as she fled this deadly trap. Yet no matter how fast she ran, the bullets seemed to track her every move. She twisted, veered, even stumbled, anything to dodge those murderous projectiles. Then it happened. A sudden burning impact struck her lower body. Instantly, her legs went numb. She pitched forward, sprawling across the pavement as fear and despair flooded her mind. Gasping, she caught sight of the wound, a ragged hole in her thigh, blood gushing out and soaking her dress in deep red. Her vision dimmed, her heart pounded, and in that moment, the world fell silent around her. Chapter 12:11. Sakurajima Mai becomes light. Mai's words died on her lips as a blast of agony ripped through her body. Her voice quivered like a candle flame caught in a sudden gust on the verge of snuffing out. Invisible forces hammered her, and every nerve burned as though set aflame, sending searing pain racing to her brain. She reached out, desperate for something to steady herself, but her hands flailed uselessly before collapsing to the ground. The heavy fall kicked up dust, and there she lay, small and vulnerable against the earth. Time seemed to stretch and thicken around her, every second drawn out in torturous slowness. Breathing became a battle. Each inhale felt like a boulder pressing on her chest. Each exhale drove agony deeper into her lungs, as if her very organs were being torn apart. Her face drained of color until she looked almost translucent. Beads of sweat appeared on her forehead, and her lips pressed into a thin, determined line. Pain radiated from her waist in relentless waves, threatening to drag her into unconsciousness. Mai Sakurajima felt a scorching pain deep in her bones, as if 1,000 needles were simultaneously piercing her flesh. Every breath felt like being consumed by flames. Warm blood oozed from her wound, quickly soaking through her clothes, a grim testament to her fading life. She tried to move, even an inch, but the agony only intensified, and she bit back a cry. The world around her began to blur. Colors faded into a misty haze, and sounds drifted to her like distant echoes from another realm. She seemed suspended between consciousness and oblivion, trapped in a silent dream where everything had lost its warmth and hue, leaving only cold, endless darkness. In the distance, muffled shouts reached her ears. A voice called her name, then vanished as if it had never been there. She couldn't tell who it was, or whether she still had the strength to answer. A dreadful certainty gripped her. Life was slipping away at a terrifying speed, as though an unseen hand were dragging her downward into a boundless, bottomless abyss. Mai Sakurajima's limbs felt leaden as she tried to struggle free. She screamed for help, but her voice died in her throat. Darkness threatened to swallow her whole, and her thoughts, untethered as a kite with a broken string, drifted helplessly toward oblivion. Boom! Boom! A powerful, rhythmic heartbeat suddenly thundered in her ears, steady, unyielding, as if born in the heavens and resonating through her chest. Warmth spread through her veins, bolstering her weakening resolve. Gritting her teeth, Mai forced her eyes open and froze. Towering not far away stood a colossal figure clad in gleaming silver armor. He rose so high that it seemed he could hold up the sky itself. Sunlight danced across his polished plates like divine fire, lending him the aura of some ancient warrior god descended to earth. His helmeted head tilted slightly, and two brilliant lights shone from beneath the visor, eyes like distant stars, deep and inscrutable, watching her with unwavering focus. As the Knight Ethan stepped forward, the world around them brightened, as though his very presence dispelled the shadows. In that moment, hope returned to Mai's weary heart. The lights coalesced like molten water, streaming in from every direction until they formed a glowing cocoon around Sakurajima Mai. The warmth and softness of that radiance washed over her pain and fear, offering a sudden, fragile spark of hope in her darkest hour. "Do you wish to become the light?" A solemn, sacred voice resonated in her mind, ancient as the wind through old trees, boundless in its majesty and mercy. Mai felt it stir something deep within her soul, awakening a thrilling pulse of possibility. To become the light, could that truly shield her? Could it grant her the power to survive? Doubt fluttered in her chest. She had never heard such a legend, nor imagined herself as anything other than human. Yet with no other choice before her, she surrendered to that inner yearning. "I want to become the light," she breathed, her voice trembling but firm with resolve. Mai Sakurajima felt as if she'd become a shaft of light, slicing through the darkness to illuminate the road before her. Power she'd never known surged within her, quivering to be unleashed. Then, in an instant, a miracle took place. Her wounds began to heal at an astonishing rate, the fierce pain melting away beneath a warm, gentle energy, like spring sunshine breaking through heavy clouds. It felt as though a clear stream ran just beneath her skin, carrying renewal and repair. Torn muscles and fractured bones knitted themselves back together, rebuilding her body with uncanny speed until she stood fully restored. Strength flooded her limbs. She had been reborn. With cautious determination, Mai pushed herself to her feet and met the gaze of the silver giant, Ethan. Gratitude and awe swelled in her heart. Ethan inclined his massive head in acknowledgement, a faint shimmer of approval glinting in his eyes. Ethan turned and stared into the distance, bracing himself for the battle to come. Mai Sakurajima fell into step beside him. She didn't fully understand what lay ahead, but she sensed that she'd embarked on an entirely new journey, one fraught with uncertainty and danger. Elsewhere in the city, the Power Armor Squad was still locked in combat with the monster. Then, like a meteor ripping through a moonless sky, a blinding golden light cut across the darkness, turning night into an instant midday. For a heartbeat, every street and skyscraper was bathed in unnatural radiance. This was no celestial event, but something far more extraordinary, an object charged with unimaginable energy, hurtling through the firmament at impossible speed. Down below, the beast, drunk on its own triumph, threw back its head and let loose a thunderous roar, convinced itself invincible. In that moment of arrogance, the golden light above accelerated, collapsing into a razor-sharp beam that dove straight toward the creature. Chapter 12:12. How could it be Ultraman? The monster's compound trembled as an immense shadow blotted out the sky. Instinctively, the creature snarled and looked up, only to see a towering silver figure hurtling toward it at impossible speed. In that heartbeat, the monster realized it had already lost. Boom! A blast like a falling meteor shattered the air. The entire block shook as a blinding collision of golden light, and the beast's dark green energy signaled utter devastation. A shockwave ripped outward, reducing nearby buildings to rubble. The arrogant creature was sent hurtling into the earth, carving a crater deep enough to swallow a bus. Dust and debris exploded in every direction. Then came a second wave, an invisible tempest of air that swept away flames and smoke, leaving a momentary vacuum in its wake. All was silent. From that stillness, a massive fist emerged. There, half-crouched amid the ruin, stood a silver giant nearly as tall as the shattered buildings around him. His fist, still glowing faintly, was buried up to the wrist in the spot where the monster had just stood. Ethan's voice echoed inside that hulking form, calm, resolute, and utterly unyielding. The monster, battered and buried, whimpered beneath him. It hadn't expected, could not have expected. Ultraman. Silence reigned for a long, tense moment, until Ethan's fist withdrew, and he prepared to deliver the final blow. The city might lie in ruins, but tonight, hope had descended in silver and gold. Ethan stood tall in his gleaming silver armor, each plate catching the light in a cold, steely flash. Beneath the polished curves, his muscles flexed with effortless power. His eyes shone like distant stars, calm and resolute. With a slow, deliberate motion, Ethan withdrew his massive fist. Where the creature had stood, there was nothing but a cratered slab of shattered stone, and at its center, a dark, viscous pool that had once been the monster's heart. The alien body had been obliterated completely, reduced to formless ichor by that single, crushing blow. He looked every bit the divine warrior come from the heavens, a beacon of hope amid the ruin and flames that still licked the broken walls of the district. Yet in the wake of his strike, the world seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind died down, and for a moment, time itself felt suspended. From behind the crumbling barriers, the power-armored squad watched in stunned silence. Ash fell around them as they stared, mouths agape. At last, one of them whispered, voice trembling, "My God!" No one dared speak after that. In the hush that followed, hope, that fragile, precious spark, kindled in every heart. Ethan's unit had been rigorously trained for every imaginable threat, insurgents, biohazards, even rogue AI constructs, but nothing in their experience prepared them for what stood before them now. A towering silver figure, easily 50 feet tall, loomed in the clearing, its metallic skin catching the floodlights and casting ripples of light across the shocked soldiers. Silence reigned for a heartbeat. Then Corporal Davis, the team's resident special effects enthusiast, broke it. His voice trembled with equal parts disbelief and exhilaration. "No, it can't be Ultraman!" The words fell like a stone into a still pond. Soldiers exchanged bewildered glances. In their trained minds, Ultraman belonged to television screens and childhood daydreams, a fictional hero battling monsters, not something they might encounter on an active mission. Yet here he was, in 3 dimensions, every bit as real as the rifles in their hands. "Ultraman?" Sergeant Hayes echoed, tone skeptical. "Yes," Davis insisted, eyes wide, voice cracking with excitement. "And not just any Ultraman. Ultraman Nexus." A strange light danced in Davis's eyes, as if some long-buried hope had suddenly ignited. Ethan forced himself to take a steadying breath. Whatever this giant was, friend or foe, it had just upended everything they thought they knew about reality. Ethan's heart pounded as the towering figure of Ultraman Nexus materialized before them. To him, Nexus wasn't simply a legendary name. It was a source of strength, a steadfast symbol of hope that had carried him through his darkest hours. Now, to see that symbol walk the earth in flesh and blood was nothing short of miraculous. "Ultraman Nexus, really?" he whispered, awe and excitement warring in his voice. Around him, the rest of the team exchanged low, incredulous murmurs. None of them fully grasped the tangled history behind Ultraman Nexus, but that one name was enough to stir something primal and hopeful in every soul present. Beside Ethan, Mai Sakurajima stood rooted to the spot, her eyes wide. She'd always believed that becoming light was just a poetic way to talk about courage or inspiration. But now, confronting this luminous being, she realized that light was more than a metaphor. It was a bridge between reality and legend, a force unbound by time, connecting past, present, and an unknowable future. Ultraman, that name sounds familiar. Mai Sakurajima's hearing, augmented far beyond any human norm, picked up the armored unit's radio chatter as easily as if they were standing beside her. At the same instant, the command center screens flickered to life with the live feed from the power armor team's cameras. A hushed awe fell across the room. Every single frame was undeniable. A towering silver figure, poised against the skyline like a god descended from the heavens, exuding overwhelming majesty. No one dared look away. "Have the gods truly come?" someone whispered, the words trembling in the silence. Immediately, the hush erupted into speculation. "It can't be. Is that some kind of giant monster?" "Look again. That's not a kaiju. It's Ultraman. Ultraman Nexus." A fervent fan in the back finally lost his composure and shouted, pride infusing every syllable as if he shared a secret bond with the legendary hero. But not everyone was so quick to believe. "What exactly did you say? Nexus Ultraman?" snapped an officer, his voice sharp. He jabbed a finger at the screen. "Be clear. Explain yourself." Ethan's face was etched with disbelief and seriousness. There was no way he could accept something so absurd. The ardent fans they'd questioned first fell silent for a moment, then gathered themselves and began sharing everything they knew about Nexus Altman. They spoke of the legendary hero's battles against dark forces, of his unyielding defense of Earth. Their voices brimmed with passion, their words so vivid that several onlookers visibly trembled, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Still, the more rational members of the group wouldn't be swayed. "Impossible," one minister declared flatly. "Preposterous." Another minister leaned forward, voice measured and cautious. "Perhaps it's just someone who resembles him," he suggested. "Or worse, a demon or monster assuming his form to win our trust." Suspicion and wariness carried through his tone. He clearly refused to accept such a fantastic claim without proof. After all, the whole situation felt like a scene torn straight from some over-the-top TV special produced on a distant island nation. Chapter 12-13. The Last Hassan Appears. The survivors gathered on the ruined boulevard stared in stunned silence, their eyes wide with disbelief. Before them loomed a towering silver figure, striding across the wreckage of shattered skyscrapers and trading thunderous blows with grotesque beasts that had only ever haunted legends. It seemed impossible, an illusion, a prank, or some arcane transformation, yet there it was, real and resplendent. Nexus Ultraman. "Do you think someone found the treasure, and that's why Ultraman showed up?" a young researcher whispered, his voice wavering between skepticism and awe. His question spread through the crowd like ripples across water, reminding everyone of humanity's last desperate hope. Ever since the dimensional rifts tore open the sky, unleashing nightmarish monsters into the world, people had hunted the fabled treasure said to grant its bearer godlike power. Countless expeditions had failed, until this moment. High above the chaos, perched on a crumbling overpass, stood Ethan Hassan. His heart pounded as he clutched the ancient artifact, feeling its hidden energy awaken under his fingertips. The relic pulsed in time with the silver giant below, forging an unbreakable bond between them. Ethan took a steadying breath and raised the treasure aloft. A brilliant light burst forth, enveloping Ultraman in a radiant nexus. With renewed vigor, the colossal hero surged forward, launching into battle with a roar that shook the heavens. Today, Ethan Hassan would prove that even the smallest spark of hope could ignite the greatest salvation. Ethan sat among the assembled researchers, all of them staring at the blank expressions around the table. So far, their expedition had turned up nothing, not a single clue to the legendary treasure they'd been chasing. Doubts had begun to creep in. Some whispered that the world god who'd promised this fortune was nothing but a charlatan. Even the more optimistic voices were growing hoarse. But then Dr. Sato had stood up and offered a new theory, one that felt like a shaft of light piercing their collective gloom. "What if the treasure does exist," she'd said, "and it possesses the power to transform an ordinary human into an Ultraman?" A stunned silence followed. The very notion sounded absurd, and yet, somehow, thrillingly plausible. "What exactly is this treasure?" Someone finally piped up, eyes locked on the huge silver Ultraman flickering on the screen at the front of the room. Alongside the grainy image, they'd compiled every scrap of footage and data they could find. Tokyo, Kyoto, both laid to waste. Cities across the island nation already in chaos. But by some miracle, every last recording of that Ultraman had survived. Despite the country's reliance on outdated hard drives, these files had proven indestructible, and now they were the team's only lead. A hush fell as they watched the towering figure on screen. If Dr. Sato was right, this wasn't just a monster hunt. It was the key to unleashing humanity's next evolution. And perhaps at last, they would recover the treasure that made it all possible. Ethan and the rest of the team gathered around a bank of monitors, fast-forwarding through the Ultraman Nexus special at triple speed. What had once been little more than weekend entertainment now served as critical research material for their ongoing investigation into the Ultraman phenomenon. Each battle sequence, each transformation, every line of offhand dialogue was carefully logged and analyzed. "Do you think it's some kind of wish-granting device?" Marcus asked, pausing the footage on a scene where Nexus conjures an energy blade. "Like a treasure that makes imagination real?" "Too neat," Ava replied without looking up from her notes. "If it could create anything you wanted, the user would be unstoppable. Just imagine it and poof, instant reality." Ethan tapped his pen against his notebook. "But the legends talk about a gift from the world god. It wouldn't be something mundane. There must be a catch." "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "If it's divine, in origin, true power lies with whoever controls it. Everything we're seeing, these weapons, these forms, are only playthings in the hands of whoever holds the real treasure." Ava leaned back in her chair. "It's just frustrating that we can't get anyone at Subaraya Productions on the phone. If we could ask them what Ultraman Nexus is supposed to represent, we'd be light years ahead." Silence settled over the room as they considered how much remained hidden behind the spectacle of flashing lights and towering foes. The thrill of discovery battled with the sting of unanswered questions, but none of them were ready to give up. Not when every frame of this drama might hold the clue that finally explained the true nature of Ultraman Nexus. Scene 1. The briefing room. Colonel Park tapped a finger against the conference table. If Nexus Corporation really has proprietary data on this Ultraman phenomenon, we need to see it, now. Director Hayes leaned back in his chair, arms folded. I've already requested access, but they're stonewalling. They claim everything is classified. Lieutenant Chen glanced at the wall-mounted monitor, where grainy battle footage played on a loop. Sir, look at this. Whoever, or whatever, this Ultraman is, the power output alone defies our current weaponry. We're flying blind. Hayes exchanged a worried glance with Park. Keep pushing Nexus Corp. If we can't negotiate, we might have to assert legal authority to seize their research. Before they could settle on a course of action, the feed suddenly cut out. Scene 2. The battlefield outskirts. Far away, on the scorched plains where the last kaiju had fallen, Ethan stood at the center of a crater. A squad of power-armored soldiers had surrounded him moments ago, weapons leveled in disbelief. Wait, one of them, a young private, was still yelling, "What the hell are you? Ultraman Nexus?" Ethan's towering form flickered in the smoky air. He flexed a massive fist, the same one that just seconds ago had obliterated the creature with a single punch. His luminous armor traced with lines of brilliant light, and he looked down at the stunned troopers as if seeing them for the first time. Then, without a word, Ethan closed his eyes. His body began to shimmer, each segment of his armor dissolving into countless motes of light. They drifted upward like fireflies before vanishing entirely. Private Ramirez scrambled forward. Did he just disappear? Lieutenant Sato stood in awe, watching the spot where Ethan had been. No, he corrected himself, voice trembling. According to every legend, Ultramen don't vanish. They return to the light, become light themselves. The soldiers exchanged silent nods. In the distance, the horizon glowed with the last embers of the fallen kaiju's destruction. But here, in the hush that followed Ethan's departure, only one thing was certain. Humanity had just witnessed something far beyond its understanding, and tomorrow's strategy session would be unlike any other. They turn into light particles and return to their world once their mission is over or their energies depleted. Ethan frowned. But they have mass. Is this some kind of mass energy conversion? How would that even work? His question fell over the room like a ripple, sending everyone into deep thought. Across from him, Mai Sakurajima held an extra evolution thruster in her hand. It looked like a short blade, neatly sheathed until needed. When drawn and raised high, it unleashed a brilliant surge of light. In that flash, the fitter would transform into Ultraman Nexus. Beside the thruster lay an energy blaster, a shockwave pistol with two distinct modes. If you extended the barrel straight ahead, it became an assault rifle, firing devastating vacuum shockwaves strong enough to obliterate small targets. Bend the handle downward, and it shifted into summoning mode, launching signal flares to call in the flying vessel known as the Stone Wing. Mai turned the thruster over in her hand, her expression calm. She instinctively understood exactly how these two devices function and how vital they were to the success of their missions. Ethan held the strange weapon in his hands and turned it over carefully. A sleek, rigid barrel glowed faintly at the tip, nothing like a conventional firearm. No folding stock, no familiar trigger guard, just an alien device that throbbed with hidden power. Could this energy cannon really protect him? Only moments ago, he discovered he could transform into Ultraman Nexus. He still had no idea how strong he was. Worse, every time he shifted into that form, people around him acted as if he'd vanished. He became utterly invisible. He crouched behind a shattered concrete barrier, heart pounding. What kind of power was this? What had he become? Ethan glanced down a ruined street. He needed a safer spot, and maybe a clue about this Ultraman identity. Stepping gingerly over a chunk of twisted rebar, he rounded a corner and froze. A young woman strolled through the wreckage as if she belonged there. Crumbling buildings loomed overhead, and beasts snarled all around, yet not one of them paid her the slightest attention. Ethan's breath caught. Invisible, like him, he swallowed his fear and called out, "Hello!" The girl started, then spun around. Her eyes widened in astonishment. You? You can see me?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, my name's Ethan. What's yours?" A flicker of relief crossed her face. "I'm Taki Kato." They stood in silence for a moment as distant roars shook the air. Invisible to the throngs of panicked civilians and rampaging monsters, They were each other's first, and perhaps only, allies in this shattered world. As Ethan raised the energy cannon once more, he realized that finding answers together might be the only way they'd survive what came next. Chapter 12:14, Two Akalans. Ethan is a third-year student at Fengzaki Academy and one of the founding members of its fellow gaming club, Blessing Software. Over the years, he's worn many hats, head planner, vice president, and earned a reputation so formidable that other players have nicknamed him Last Harzan, Crown Assassin, and Aka Karen. Yet outside the club's world, Ethan might as well be invisible. His everyday presence is so unassuming, it borders on transparent. Mild-mannered and soft-spoken, he lacks any flashy mannerisms or attention-grabbing tics, almost as if he possesses a peculiar talent for vanishing into the background. To most people, this quietness seems inconsequential, but for Ethan, it's the reality he's faced his whole life. Still, if you pause and look more closely, you'll notice that his features are anything but ordinary. He has well-balanced facial proportions, smooth, clear skin, and a lean, athletic build, qualities that, were they packaged with a more outgoing personality, might easily command notice. As it is, though, Ethan both surprises and eludes you in equal measure. Kato Hui's talents, her sharp mind, steady hands, and unfailing reliability should have made her stand out. Instead, she remains almost a ghost in her own classroom. More than once, classmates have joked, "Do we even have her in this class?" In everyday school life, even her closest friends overlook her without meaning to. In the anime club's activities, Kato Hui quietly takes on every task, designing game scenarios, supporting the director's work, and does each one flawlessly. Yet when the cameras roll, she barely registers. On screen, she's a shadow relegated to the margins. In some episodes, she disappears altogether. I still recall the day Ethan went live to introduce the club members, and, without a second thought, failed to mention her. There was no malice in it, only proof of how easily she slips from everyone's notice. At home, it's no better. When the family piles into the car for an outing, it isn't unusual for them to set off and only realize halfway down the street that they've left her behind. And by then, she's learned not to make a fuss. It seems Kato Hui has grown used to being invisible, and no one seems inclined to change that. Ethan always spent these long afternoons alone in his room, staring at the empty walls with a knot in his chest. What made him feel most helpless was how, even when the teacher called his name during roll, it still seemed to vanish into thin air, as if he truly didn't exist. At first, the arrival of monsters and the outbreak of supernatural powers had felt like a blessing. His old insecurities seemed to vanish overnight. But then Ethan discovered a darker side to his new gift. He could phase right through people. Whether in class, in the hallways, or even at the dinner table with his family, no one noticed him. That power did keep him alive when danger struck, but it also erased any sense that he mattered to anyone. He had become the literal definition of invisible. Sakurajima Mai's fall was even more dramatic. Once the school's shining star, she went from being the focus of every conversation to a ghost no one could see, all because of some unknown force. Unlike Ethan's slow slide into obscurity, Mai's disappearance happened overnight. One day she was the talk of the campus. The next, she'd vanished from everyone's memory. The unbearable gulf between her old life and this strange new reality had driven Mai Sakurajima to the brink of despair. She never asked for this existence, yet everything about it felt profoundly wrong. Then she noticed another lone figure at the edge of the school courtyard, Haikato. In that instant, Mai felt as though she were gazing into a mirror, another girl erased by the world, yet carrying herself with quiet composure. Intrigued and comforted in equal measure, Mai approached and asked in a soft voice, "Have you ever felt invisible?" Hai turned, meeting her eyes with calm curiosity. "Invisible doesn't quite cover it," she said. "Nobody even registers that I'm here. It's as if I don't exist, like I've never shown up in anyone's memory." A surge of relief and recognition flooded Mai. "That's exactly how I feel," she whispered. Encouraged by Hai's gentle understanding, Mai began to share her story. How one by one her friends, her classmates, even her own family stopped seeing her. How each day of being forgotten left her more hollow. Hai listened without interruption, her dark eyes full of empathy. When Mai faltered, Hai reached out and squeezed her hand, a simple gesture that felt like sunlight piercing the darkness. Mai gripped her hand back, as if clutching the only lifeline she had left, and continued to pour out all the loneliness and confusion she'd bottled up. With every word, the shadows in her heart receded just a little, warmed by Hai's unwavering presence and compassion. In that shared silence, as two girls forgotten by the world but refusing to give in, they both found a fragile spark of hope. Ethan lingered in the shadows just beyond the broken steps of the old amphitheater, watching two figures slowly emerge from the dusk. One was Kato Megumi, poised, confident, and unafraid of her own solitude. The other was Sakurajima Mai, still adjusting to a world that refused to acknowledge her existence. Kato offered Mai a gentle smile, her hand resting lightly on Mai's arm. "Don't be so hard on yourself," she said quietly. Mai shook her head, glancing down at the cracked concrete beneath her feet. "How am I not supposed to be sad?" she murmured, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I've spent my whole life invisible to everyone." Kato's eyes softened. "I know the feeling," she replied. "I've been ignored since I was a child, too. But in all those years of being unseen, I learned one thing. You have to make the world notice you, on your own terms." A flush of shame colored Mai's cheeks. She remembered every moment she'd spent as an Akalin, trapped between recognition and irrelevance. A few tears welled up, and she blinked them back fiercely. I can't just pretend I'm okay," she choked out. "Not now, not in this world." Beyond them, the city lay in ruins. Monstrous shapes moved through its empty streets, and human voices were rarities, echoes from a life long lost. Mai's clenched fists trembled. "We used to at least see other people," she said, her tone cracking. "But now, it's like there's nothing left but monsters." Kato squeezed her shoulder. "You're not alone," she insisted, "not unless you decide to be." Ethan finally stepped forward into the failing light. Both women turned, startled by his presence. In the hush that followed, all three of them felt the same fragile hope stir, proof that, even in a world determined to forget them, they could still choose to be seen. Imagine the psychological pressure Mai Sakurajima must be feeling. Overnight, someone can actually see her, and even talk to her. No wonder her emotions are in turmoil. "It's okay, Mai-san," Kato Megumi says, giving her a calm, reassuring smile. She's encountered this panic before, and has learned not to let it throw her off. Megumi turns to face her. "What should we do next? Head for the Tiangong Temple?" Mai draws in a breath and lets it out more steadily. Until now, the monsters have barely acknowledged her presence, but that only made her too afraid to approach them, and certainly not bold enough to make for the temple. "Everything feels different today. I've heard it's safe there," she says at last. Megumi nods, and together they set out. Mai keeps her ability to transform into Ultraman to herself. After years in the limelight as an idol, she knows just how dangerous it can be to let people in on your secrets. The fight has spread far beyond Kyoto now, and new threats could be lurking around every corner. Chapter 12:15, Tiangong Temple Urban Circle. Mai Sakurajima and Kei Kato arrived in Tokyo's old Tengu district, the city's former bustling heart, without encountering any trouble. They slipped into a small, cozy restaurant tucked among narrow streets, where patrons whispered over steaming bowls of noodles or savored each bite in companionable silence, barely noticing the two young women in the corner. "Hard to believe this used to be the center of Tokyo," Mai said softly, stirring her hot tea. Her eyes held equal parts nostalgia and uncertainty, and even in a hushed voice, her words carried across the quiet space. Kei lowered her gaze to the steaming ramen before her. The rising vapors blurred her expression as she met Mai's remark. "It's changed so much," she agreed quietly, "but at least we have somewhere to start over. That's better than nothing." Finishing their meal in muted companionship, Mai reached into her pocket and produced a few slightly worn banknotes. She placed them neatly on the table, her movements precise and respectful. The restaurant owner, a composed, middle-aged woman, moved with practiced ease as she set the table. Her dark eyes flicked over the bills Mai Sakurajima laid down. Then she gave a single, slight nod, as though to say, "That will do," to her two silent new customers. Mai and Aikato exchanged a quick smile, and that unspoken camaraderie brought a small warmth in this unfamiliar place. Fortunately, the island nation's old currency was still accepted. Though Tokyo and Kyoto prefectures had been wiped away by the disaster and the surrounding regions badly damaged, the Osaka, Tokyo, and Nagoya metropolitan areas had managed to regroup into a stable Tiangong Temple urban circle. Given how much effort that had taken, changing to a new currency was out of the question. No one had the manpower or resources to pull it off. Mai and A breathed easy at the thought of paying with familiar notes. Law-abiding by nature, they had neither the means nor the inclination to steal. At least now they knew they could rely on honest commerce. Ethan stepped out of the restaurant alongside Mai Sakurajima and Kei Kato. Before them lay Tiangong District's glittering skyline, a forest of staggered high-rises and pulsing neon that turned the night into a second sunrise. This was the newly built Tiangong Temple Urban Circle, a city born in the disaster's aftermath. Drawing lessons from Tokyo and Kyoto's old neighborhoods, its architects had devised a sturdier, more advanced urban grid. Yet for Mai and Kei, every street still felt alien. Mai paused on the curb, her eyes reflecting the neon glow. "What do we do now?" she asked softly. "Nobody even knows we exist here. Tiangong still feels like a completely different world." Behind them, Kei shrugged. "We'll figure something out, but first we need a plan and a place to stay." Mai glanced away, anxiety tightening her chest. Her own home in Tokyo had vanished almost overnight when Ghidorah, the colossal beast, had unleashed its CT6 hurricane attack. Entire city blocks were reduced to rubble. The reconstruction would drag on for years. Despite Japan's considerable resources, not even 100 square meters of Mai's former neighborhood had been rebuilt. Turning to Ethan, she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And to think, becoming Ultraman was never part of my life plan." She shook her head in disbelief. "I still can't wrap my head around it." Ethan offered her a reassuring nod. "We'll get through this, together. First step, we find somewhere safe. Then we figure out how to, save the world." With that, the unlikely trio vanished into the neon-lit streets of Tiangong, determined to carve out their place in this new urban labyrinth and to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their only option now was to confront the world god. Was he the one who had granted Ethan the power to become Ultraman? If not, how would Ethan feel about her, the woman who claimed to control such power? "I don't know," Ethan admitted, his voice hollow. Kei Kato exhaled slowly. Why? Her entire family had been lost in the disaster. She was truly alone. Surviving against the odds felt like both a blessing and a burden. They paused by a roadside news monitor. The screen recapped how, despite modern weaponry often faltering against supernatural foes, contemporary technology excelled at intelligence and surveillance. Satellites, strewn across low Earth orbit like a vast net, scanned the globe without interruption. High-altitude reconnaissance planes, cruising at 10,000 meters, carried precision sensors through the clouds. Agile low-altitude drones could dash to any hotspot in moments. And with cameras perched on every street corner and alleyway, an airtight web of observation now blanketed the planet. High-tech battlefield sensors and real-time intelligence networks have all but erased the delay between the front lines and the outside world, exposing horrors that used to lie hidden in the darkness. On the large hollow screen before him, a grim-faced news anchor stood amid rubble and shattered walls, once the proud remains of a flourishing town. Occasional flashes of devastation scrolled behind him, each frame more chilling than the last. "It is estimated that 1,670 residents lived here before the slaughter," the anchor said in a low, resonant tone that struck like a hammer blow. Among them were grandparents and toddlers, the laughter of families, the flicker of countless aspirations. And now, all of it has been snuffed out overnight. Creatures, demons, some are calling them, have poured in as if risen straight from the depths of hell, mercilessly feasting on innocent lives. Make no mistake, this crisis has far outstripped anything we could have imagined or controlled. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then, with a voice tinged by both helplessness and despair, he added, "These monsters are spreading. Everywhere we look, they multiply, threatening to engulf us all." Ethan sat back in his chair, the glow of the screen casting deep shadows across his face. He had seen the footage dozens of times already, but each replay felt like a fresh wound. The world was unraveling faster than any intelligence report could keep pace, and soon, he knew, he'd have to move. because waiting was no longer an option. Bystanders fell into hushed, panicked whispers. Some spoke of the recent surge in monster attacks. Others worried aloud for their family's safety. Many had already been forced onto the road just to survive. Governments' armies, shadowy mercenary bands, and self-styled superhumans all vied for control of this broken land, but ordinary citizens saw no comfort in their battles. They lived on a razor's edge, every day bracing for the next demon raid that might wipe them out. Why don't they head over to the Tiangong Temple District and seek the gods' protection? Someone asked, voice trembling with a sliver of hope. A harsh laugh cut through the crowd. Do you really think they don't want to? The roads are too dangerous, and the monsters aren't the only threat. People will kill for their own gain. From Kyoto Prefecture to Tokyo, gold flows like water. Wherever money changes hands, there's blood in the dust. Throughout history, this is held true in every land. In times of turmoil, people will stop at nothing to survive, even if it means sacrificing others. The sudden appearance of those extraordinary creatures has only plunged the world into deeper chaos and disorder. Chapter 1216, Mai Sakurajima. I have to do something. Ethan watched Mai Sakurajima in silence. He just handed her the power of Ultraman Nexters, fully expecting her to hurry off to Kyoto and confront the rampaging monster. When she didn't move, a twinge of disappointment pricked at him, but he could also see the conflict in her eyes. In a world turned upside down by this strange new war, even the strongest could hesitate. Since the outbreak, every nation had scrambled to send its best. Some commanders pursued rare resources, others sought to flex national pride, and many simply wanted to secure their place in a conflict fought without gunpowder or conventional armies. But amid all the troop movements and territorial skirmishes, a different kind of force had emerged, the extras. These gifted individuals, who had surpassed human limits and displayed phenomenal abilities, were the true game-changers. They were the kings on this war's chessboard, capable of toppling whole strategies by themselves. Whenever an extra switched sides, it sent shockwaves through both camps. Allies celebrated the sudden boost in strength. Enemies collapsed under its weight. This ruthless calculus, any advantage or we lose, had driven the global balance into a knife edge. Victory was no longer about who had the bigger army, but about who could harness the most powerful singular asset. Yet even amid this high-stakes scramble, one player's maneuvers shone brighter than the rest, the British Federation's latest gambit. As Mai stood at Ethan's side, still clutching the glowing seal of Ultraman Nexters, both of them knew that the real battle for the future was just beginning, and that the next move would come from London. The British Federation, an empire whose sun never set, hasn't lost an ounce of its old arrogance and selfishness over the centuries. Their creed is stark and ruthless. If one holds power, one uses it, and if one cannot hold power, then no one may. This mentality casts the Federation repeatedly in the role of global agitator. They will protect their own interests at any cost, even if it means trampling others, or sacrificing lives to do so. On these scattered islands, they have driven that policy to its extreme, deploying elite special forces units, secretly bankrolling private militias, and waging proxy wars designed to weaken rival nations. All the while, they scout relentlessly for the richest veins of resources. As a result, every inch of island territory is overrun with private armies and mercenary bands, each prowling for profit and influence in the British Federation's shadow. Some fought for coin, others for vengeance, and a few chased power beyond imagination. In this world, alliances were nothing more than temporary conveniences, and betrayal was the only constant. The moment rumors of treasure surfaced, mercenaries and opportunists converged like sharks sensing blood, each determined to claim the prize. Caught in the middle, the ordinary foot soldiers suffered the most. They not only faced enemy gunfire, but also had to watch their backs against scheming comrades. To them, those with extraordinary abilities were both hope and doom. Their protection could spell survival, yet every maneuver by these gifted warriors risked turning fellow recruits into lifeless bodies on the battlefield. Fuck him! Kill him! That treasure's mine! Such desperate, greedy cries echoed in every soldier's mind, driving them onward. In a place like this, trust was rarer than gold. The soldiers broke into small bands, eyeing one another with growing mistrust, and some even resorted to murder, believing it would secure their own survival as the world fell apart around them. "I have to do something," Ethan muttered under his breath. He sank into the sofa and fixed his gaze on the flickering TV screen. The news montage was a relentless barrage of ruin and despair. Once proud cities reduced to rubble, desperate faces etched with fear and sorrow. A surge of emotion welled up in Ethan's chest, a sober awareness of the extraordinary power he possessed, tempered by a profound empathy for the countless lives shattered by this calamity. He wanted to intervene, to use his abilities to protect these people, to shatter their chains of terror and give them back their hope. But the world he faced was far harsher than any ideal. Across the Tiangong Temple district, once a bustling urban hub, residents had erected new shelters, yet every home groaned under the weight of too many occupants and too few supplies. Refugees flooded in from every direction, desperate for a roof overhead and food in their bellies. Yet there wasn't a single spare room to be found. Ethan pressed his palms to his temples. The scale of the crisis pressed down on him like a physical weight. He closed his eyes, steeling himself. There had to be a way. If he could rally local aid efforts, or perhaps send a message to the authorities, anywhere, anyone, he might just bend the tide of hopelessness. "I can't stand by and watch this happen," he whispered. "Not when I can help." With that resolve burning in his chest, Ethan pushed to his feet. The time for hesitation was over. It was time to act. To manage the crisis, the government hastily erected rows of makeshift tents along the city's outskirts to shelter the newly homeless. Mai Sakurajima and Kei Kato made their way toward the encampment in silence, each weighed down by the same dread. When they reached the entrance, they stopped dead in their tracks. Before them lay an endless sea of gray tents, pitched so close together it was impossible to slip between them. Inside that fabric labyrinth, men and women, children and the elderly huddled in cramped quarters, whole families sharing a single tent, struggling to maintain a shred of dignity. Ragged old men shuffled along the pathways. Wide-eyed children darted past them, clutching blankets or small bundles of belongings. The air pulsed with urgency and despair. Cato studied the huddled masses and shook his head. "There isn't a single empty spot," he said quietly. "Nobody even noticed us arrive." Mai slipped a hand onto his shoulder. "Stay here and wait," she whispered. "I'll find a way in." With that, she slipped into the maze of tents, leaving Kato behind at the threshold. He watched her go, torn between doubt and the conviction that Mai would somehow make this impossible situation work. Ethan slipped through the crowded pavilion until he reached a quiet corner, far from the raucous throng. Only the soft sigh of wind accompanied him as he paused and drew from his pocket a small, glowing device, the Evolution Trust. This artifact was the source of his power and the world's only hope. Cradling it in both hands, he murmured, "Let me be the light." He lifted the trust as though it were a blade. The moment he extended it before him, a searing radiance burst forth, bathing the entire sky in silver fire. Under its brilliance, Ethan's body began to shift. His frame lengthened, muscles tightening into smooth, powerful lines. In seconds, where a lone figure once stood, there now loomed a towering silver giant, next Huso Termin, the Titan of Light, its presence descending like a beacon over the war-ravaged plain. A stunned silence fell over the onlookers. Then, a chorus of gasps and startled whispers swept through the remaining crowd as they beheld the colossal guardian who had arrived to turn the tide of battle. Chapter 1217, Ultraman Can't Break Through the Air Barrier. "It's Ultraman! He's the hero who protects us!" The shout split the afternoon calm over the Tiangong Temple district like a bolt of lightning. Between gleaming skyscrapers, the cry kindled a stubborn spark of hope. Pedestrians froze mid-stride, heads snapping skyward, their eyes tracing the silver gleam hovering above. Ethan, who usually slipped through life unnoticed, felt the weight of every stare. In an instant, he went from obscurity to the focal point of 1,000 gazes. The sensation was both thrilling and surreal. For so long, he'd been like drifting dust, unseen and unremembered. Now he hovered between earth and sky in a pose no one could ignore. Yet Ethan hadn't donned the Ultraman Naxos form for applause. Even as the city held its breath, his mind was fixed on a single stubborn objective: breaching the impenetrable air barrier that protected the temple of the Heavenly Palace. The massive silver figure of Ultraman Nexus, his armor gleaming like moonlit steel, soared into the night, heading directly for the Heavenly Palace Temple. Below him, a sea of city lights danced across his shining frame. News of his arrival raced around the globe. In this age of instant information, the unexpected appearance of Ultraman Nexus dominated every headline. Satellites from rival powers swooped in like hawks, zeroing in on the uninvited visitor. Governments, research institutes, even shadowy intelligence agencies scrambled to uncover his true identity and motives. What exactly does Ultraman Nexus intend to do at the Heavenly Palace Temple? Inside the island nation's Ministry of Defense, the atmosphere was thick with tension. In the war room, senior officers and analysts sat in stunned silence as the enormous video wall switched between live feeds, each one showing Nexus drawing ever closer to the sacred complex. Intelligence agencies around the world leapt into action the moment news of the Heavenly Palace Temple broke. Like a boulder dropped into a still pond, the revelation sent concentric ripples radiating through every corner of international security circles. In these unsettled times, any whisper of the temple's secrets risks setting off a tidal wave. Perhaps someone really did claim the treasure and transformed into Ultraman Nexters. One senior analyst speculated during a high-level briefing, his voice low. Now they intend to seek out Ethan, the so-called god of the human world. Before long, that theory begat another, even more audacious. What if these treasure-bearers aren't content to serve Ethan? What if their true aim is to confront him directly, maybe even to usurp his power for themselves? The room fell into stunned silence. To overthrow the god of the human world would be to challenge the divine order itself and provoke earthquakes across the global balance of power. Yet, with the world teetering on the brink of upheaval, nothing could be ruled impossible. Meanwhile, high above the mortal sphere, Ultraman Nexters closed in on the Heavenly Palace with a blend of awe and apprehension. Every instinct urged him onward, toward the heart of the legend, toward Ethan. But as he neared the temple's outer gates, expecting a warm reception or at least a fair hearing, he was met instead by a force more unexpected than any rumor. The palace's ancient defenses, springing to life in a dazzling display of light and sound, barring his path. Now, confronted by ramparts of celestial energy and guardians born of myth, Nexters realized that gaining an audience with Ethan would be far more perilous than he had ever imagined. The next move, whether to fight his way through, negotiate, or retreat, would decide not only his own fate, but the fate of every soul on Earth. An invisible wall of air hovered before him like an unbreakable shield, and then the giant silver figure crashed into it. A deafening bang echoed as the impact made the towering warrior shudder, the light on his forehead flickering wildly. Mai Sakurajima's head swam. It felt as if countless stars were spinning behind her eyelids. She fought to regain her balance, bewildered. How could a mere air barrier withstand Ultraman's strength? Within Tiangong Temple, the thunderous noise ricocheted through the corridors. Saiko Mushima, Shizuka Hiratsuka, Shiba Kasunoki, and Mitsu all sprang from their rooms, rushing toward the source. They emerged onto a wide terrace and froze. Suspended in midair was the colossal silver hero, locked in silent combat with the temple's invisible force field. His very presence seemed to quake the sky. The first to break the stunned silence was Rika Minami. "What is that?" Shizuka Hiratsuka's voice was scarcely more than a whisper, awed and confused. "It's Ultraman, but why is he here?" Ethan stood beside the other three, staring in disbelief at the colossal figure looming above them. As the eldest of the group, Ayaka had seen plenty in her years, but even she couldn't hide the astonishment in her eyes. Though she wasn't a devoted fan of sci-fi shows, everyone in their island nation had at least heard of Ultraman. Shichichu's brow furrowed in deep thought. She'd always taken Ultraman stories with a grain of salt, fiction, pure and simple, never imagining she'd come face to face with one of the giants herself. Seiko Mushima, ordinarily the calmest among them, had instinctively wrapped her fingers around the hilt of her knife, as if the blade could pierce this towering behemoth. "Everyone, stay calm. Let's figure out what's happening," Ethan urged, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. Saiko nodded, sliding her hand away from the blade. Ayaka drew a slow, steadying breath. No matter what this creature was, or where it came from, their first priority had to be the safety of the Heavenly Palace temple below. Above them, Ultraman Nicias rammed his massive shoulder into the shimmering air barrier that surrounded the temple grounds. The impact rang out like a thunderclap, but the barrier held firm. Again and again the giant struck, each blow echoing fruitlessly against its invisible wall. Dust and debris lit up under the force, but the barrier stood its ground, refusing to be broken. The four friends exchanged tense glances, bracing themselves for whatever came next. Mai Sakurajima realized at once that sheer force wouldn't shatter this barrier. Even in her Ultraman form, she couldn't break through the air wall. How powerful must Ethan, the god of humanity, truly be? Touching down beneath the temple of the Heavenly Palace, her eyes were drawn to the staircase of floating stone steps that led up toward the shrine. As she moved closer, the immense figure of Ultraman next her, her current transformation, abruptly contracted to her normal human height the moment she penetrated the first field. She now stood on solid ground, or so it seemed. A second, thinner air barrier shimmered over the first step. It was clear, without Ethan's express permission, no one could approach the temple. Yet here she was, inside the outer defense. Had she been granted access? Mai's heart quickened, but she kept her Ultraman form active. In her ordinary body, she'd feel too vulnerable. Only this guise gave her confidence. Steeling herself, she placed her foot on the first hovering step. The stones, though suspended in midair, held firm under her weight. Each stride was steady and unshakable. With her initial doubts dispelled, Mai Sakurajima began her ascent up the floating staircase, determined to uncover the secrets that waited at the top. Seiko and the others watched as Ultraman Nexters reverted to an ordinary human form. Climbing the steps, they realized that Ethan must have given him permission to enter. Otherwise, breaking through the air barrier and shrinking in size would have been utterly impossible. Mai Sakurajima and Seiko Mushima exchanged a questioning glance. "Come with me," Hiratsuka Shizuka said firmly. Mai Sakurajima nodded without a word, ready to follow. Chapter 1218, Author's Note. This story's boundless. Please show your support with rewards and monthly tickets. Hiratsuka Shizuka and the others escorted Mai Sakurajima through the bustling hallways to meet Ethan. Like everyone else, Mai had only ever heard stories of him. She'd never seen him in person. But as they finally arrived, all her expectations collapsed at the sight before her. He wasn't the solemn, sacred figure she'd imagined. Instead, Ethan radiated an otherworldly beauty, as if a god painted on an ancient fresco had come to life. His features were so exquisitely carved that no one dared look him squarely in the eye. Even the dust motes drifting through the sunbeams seemed to glow around him. He embodied the very essence of beauty in living form. When Ethan's gaze settled on her, Mai felt her heartbeat thunder in her ears. He spoke softly but with unmistakable authority. "Do you intend to remain kneeling before me?" Mai hesitated, caught between awe and uncertainty. Confronting Ethan, the newly crowned god of humanity, she felt powerless to resist. She'd faced formidable foes before, Ghidorah, Gatanji, but none had possessed a presence like this. And now, standing before Ethan, she realized that true power lay not in strength alone, but in the quiet command of those who wielded it. In this world, there are all kinds of special effects shows, but there's no Ultraman Tiga, no Godzilla films, only the Gamera franchise. That's why Ethan never worried about being unmasked when he conjured Ganjir and Ghidorah. With a soft hum of energy, Mai Sakurajima deactivated her transformation. In an instant, the towering Ultraman silhouette vanished, and standing in its place was a young, impossibly beautiful woman. Seiko, Mushima, and the others gaped in astonishment. None of them had suspected that the colossal hero they'd just seen was, underneath it all, this slender girl. Mai took a steadying breath, then turned to Ethan. Her eyes shone with both relief and fear. "Mr. Ethan, was it you who turned me into light?" Ethan gave a small nod. "Yes." Mai's composure cracked. She had sensed that someone powerful was guiding her transformation, but now, faced with the truth, a rush of conflicting emotions washed over her. Wonder at Ethan's ability, confusion about why he'd chosen her. Around them, Seiko and the rest exchanged stunned glances. None had ever imagined that the miracle of Ultraman Sakurajima had originated from Ethan's hand. Ethan felt everything click back into place as he considered the scope of his power. Mai Sakurajima, still gathering her courage, finally spoke. "Why do you want me to become light?" He paused, his gaze distant, almost as if he were reaching back through time. Because it seemed interesting. The simplicity of his answer left Mai momentarily speechless. Interesting? That was his reason for pulling her into a world she'd barely begun to understand? It sounded laughable. And yet, when she remembered how Ethan had saved her life in that crisis, her indignation ebbed away. She frowned. "So what now? Am I going to be your maid?" Ethan shook his head, a teasing smile flickering at the corner of his lips. "No, you're free to choose your own path. Honestly, I'm getting tired of it all." His companions stared at him, baffled by his words. Sensing their confusion, Ethan spoke more slowly, each word measured. "I'm tired of looking down on everyone and controlling every little thing. I've already destroyed too much of this world." Ethan felt no attachment to the realm he himself had laid to waste. When he first arrived, he carried himself like a god, disdainful of every rule, eager to assert his power across the land. But as days turned to months and months to years, that initial thrill burned away, leaving only an echoing void inside him. His fatal flaw had been arrogance. From the start, he'd placed himself so far above everyone else, treating the world as little more than a plaything. That icy detachment erected an unbridgeable chasm between him and everything around him. Now, however, Ethan resolved to change. He realized that unless he broke free of his own indifference, he would be trapped in endless boredom, his power meaningless if there was no one or nothing left to care about. He began to ask himself how he might re-engage with the world, how he could create something with genuine worth. No more half measures. Every day would count. A single perfect melody, one true story, one shared moment, one treasured book, one night spent in a bustling tavern, one unforgettable reading. In Ethan's mind, forging a new path, and even bending time and space, was far easier than reclaiming the spark of real meaning. Ethan didn't need to accelerate to superluminal speeds to breach the barriers of time and space. Instead, drawing on his deep mastery of the bioforce field, he devised a far more direct and efficient approach. Use the bioforce field to manipulate gravity, then harness gravity to tap into the mass energy of space-time itself. Gravity is one of the universe's fundamental forces, influencing every object in existence, time and space included. The idea might sound fantastical, but Ethan was already operating on a multiverse scale. For him, it was simplicity itself. As this plan took shape in his mind, the air around him began to warp and blur, as though an unseen tide were rising. This wasn't a mere optical illusion, but a realignment of space-time under the guiding hand of his bioforce. Then, with a sudden surge, a titanic energy burst forth from Ethan's core. It felt as if an invisible gauntlet had closed around the fabric of reality, gripping it tight. The gravitational field he generated far exceeded his own expectations, not only bending matter but unsettling the very stability of the timeline. Ethan felt the steady march of time shatter and twist, like a silk scroll caught in a fierce gale, opening up into a million possible futures. He sensed something extraordinary stirring in the cosmos. Every flicker of his intention now rippled outward as a force that could bend reality itself. Around him, gravity coiled tighter and tighter, pulling at the fabric of space-time until the distortion became almost unbearable. Without warning, Ethan raised his hand as though issuing an unspoken command to the universe. In that instant, the madness of time and space recoiled. But this was no mere rewind. Instead, the universe reorganized itself in layers and dimensions he had never conceived. Particles, beams of light, even living things unfurled and snapped into new alignments, obeying rules that had only just been written. The shattered remnants of buildings, once crushed beneath the weight of devastation, rose up, mortar and steel knitting themselves back together, gently erasing the scars of destruction. Landscapes scorched or washed away by cataclysm reformed, meadow and forest returning in a breath. And those who had been lost, whether by Ethan's own hand or by fate's cruel design, stirred back to life as the currents of restored time flowed through their veins once more. When the tumult finally subsided, the air hung still and sweet, as if the world had taken a deep, cleansing sigh. Ethan stood at the eye of this reborn reality, his heart pounding with both awe and the gravity of what he had just achieved. Everything was whole again. But he knew this miracle marked not an end, but the beginning of an entirely new chapter. Their souls, drawn by an unseen power, slipped back into their bodies, ready to pick up the journey they had left unfinished. Everywhere, from the world where Ethan first set foot to the most remote and uncharted reaches of the cosmos, an enigmatic energy now pulsed through the air, bringing about a transformation unlike anything that had come before. Chapter 1219. An unusual routine night had fallen inside the studio. The lights gradually dimmed, the camera's slow rotation finally ceased, and a hush of relief mixed with fatigue settled over the crew. Standing in the center of the set, the director raised his voice to cut through the chatter. "That's a wrap for tonight, everyone. Thank you for all your hard work. We'll pick up again tomorrow. Let's finish early so everyone can get some rest." At his words, the last vestiges of tension evaporated. Technicians moved in unison. Grips began dismantling the lighting rigs. Camera assistants stowed lenses and cables, and sound engineers packed away their equipment. Small clusters of crew members gathered beside the monitors, replaying scenes and comparing notes on performance and framing. In this modest studio, each person's contribution was vital to bringing the film to life. Leaning against a doorway in the corner, Nakano Kazuka watched the flurry of activity with a satisfied smile. She was bone-tired, but in her eyes burned the glow of accomplishment. Tonight, she delivered her best work yet. Though her role was a supporting one, for this newly debuted actress it was the biggest opportunity she'd ever earned, and she knew she hadn't wasted it. In an industry as cutthroat as this one, every break has to be fought for, and won, with everything you've got. Under the neon glow of the city, small talent agencies crowded every block, each one scrambling to turn raw hopefuls into stars. Kentaro Yamamoto, a kindly middle-aged man with a soft paunch and an ever-patient smile, ran one of the least well-known outfits in town. His roster was filled with rookies, but his faith in them ran deep, especially in his newest discovery, Ethan Nakano. "Ethan, you did excellent work today," President Yamamoto said, stepping off the set and placing a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. His concern was genuine. He had come to see how his protege handled the pressure of a primetime commercial shoot. Ethan returned the smile easily, fatigue tempered by excitement. "Thank you, sir. Honestly, I can't thank you enough. It was your belief in me that landed me this role." Yamamoto's eyes lit up. He'd watched Ethan tackle every challenge head-on, rising early for fittings, memorizing lines long into the night. "That's exactly it," he said. "In this business, opportunities don't just fall into your lap. They go to whoever's ready to grab them. And today, you proved you're more than ready. I believe that if you keep working hard, you'll become a star one day." Kazuka Nakano felt a warm surge of gratitude at President Yamamoto's words. In an industry so full of empty promises, it meant everything to know someone genuinely cared about her success. "Thank you for believing in me. I won't let you down." Yamamoto nodded approvingly, then changed the subject. "But you're still in high school, right? Juggling shoots and classes must be exhausting." A hint of worry flashed across Kazuka's face. She was indeed a student, and she tried to attend school every day, but shooting often ran late, causing her to miss morning lectures. She'd resolved to pursue acting, yet the thought of falling behind in her studies still troubled her. "Actually, President." She hesitated, and Yamamoto carried on, kindly but firmly. "Why not ask your school for a leave of absence, focus entirely on this film, then return to your classes once production wraps?" Relief washed over Kazuka. The path ahead suddenly seemed much clearer. "What do you think?" Kazuka Nakano hesitated, her heart torn. If she paused her studies and threw herself entirely into the industry, she could dedicate herself fully to filming. "Mr. Yamamoto, may I have a little time to think this over?" President Yamamoto gave a slow, understanding nod. "Of course, a decision like this can't be made lightly. It's already dark. I'll drive you home." Relief washed over Kazuka's face. "Thank you so much." He offered her a warm smile. "No need to thank me. It's my job." With that, he produced his car keys and led her out of the studio toward the parking lot. As they walked, they chatted about the movie's progress and traded lighter anecdotes, each story easing the day's tension. At the lot, Mr. Yamamoto opened the passenger door for Kazuka and gently helped her inside before settling behind the wheel himself. Just as they were about to pull away, an abrupt, jarring sound shattered the evening's calm. Ethan sat in the car under the weak glow of the parking lot lamps, his eyes drifting over the street in front of him. Suddenly, a raspy voice cut through the night air. No mistakes. One song, one verse, one book, one seal, one reading. A thin, ragged man in a tattered jacket stepped from the shadows and planted himself directly in front of Ethan's hood. President Yamamoto slammed his foot on the horn and shouted, "Hey! Move out of the way!" His tone was sharp with impatience and warning, but the stranger didn't flinch. Instead, as if pulled by an unseen force, the man crawled up onto the hood, his fingertips clawing at the metal edge. His body pressed tight against the engine, illuminated by the car's trembling headlights. Nakano Ichikawa froze beside Yamamoto, hands clasped to his chest, eyes wide with fear and confusion. The night air in the lot felt as heavy as concrete, broken only by the stranger's ragged breathing and the low growl of the idling engine. Then, without warning, the man's head began to twist and warp, his features shifting before their disbelieving eyes. Bones cracked under stretched skin, muscles and tendons snapped into new shapes faster than any human transformation should allow. In an instant, the ragged intruder was no longer a man at all, but something far more terrible. Ethan felt something writhing beneath his skin. Then, with a faint pop, his skull split open and ballooned outward. In seconds, his entire head morphed into a 2-meter-long, flesh-colored tentacle tipped with a razor-sharp blade that glinted ominously. At the base of the tentacle, where it met his neck, a new eye-like organ had formed, pulsing with eerie light, as if it could pierce straight into a person's deepest fears. "What on earth is that?" President Yamamoto gasped, his voice high and tremulous. Overcome by terror, he slammed his foot on the accelerator, desperate to flee this living nightmare. The sedan leaped forward like an untamed stallion, its front bumper shoving into the tentacled horror with a screech of grinding metal. At that split second, Ethan moved with astonishing speed and agility. He vaulted from the passenger seat and tumbled clear of the carnage just as the monstrous blade swept past. Moments later, the car crashed into the concrete wall of the parking garage with a thunderous bang. Silence fell. Dust billowed around the wreck as Ethan rolled to a stop on the asphalt, heart hammering. Across the smoldering hood, the blade-tipped tentacle thrashed wildly, proof that whatever this creature was, the danger was far from over. The car lurched violently, and in an instant the airbags sprang to life, enveloping President Yamamoto and Ika Nakano to shield them from the full impact of the crash. Chapter 1220. Kazuka Nakano, Kamen Rider Kuga. A sudden, thunderous impact threw Ichika Nakano and President Yamamoto forward, their seatbelts cutting into their chests. For a heartbeat, they struggled to breathe. Then the airbags deployed, snapping them back and sparing them from worse injury. "President, what was that?" Ichika's voice trembled as she fought the dizziness. Yamamoto shook his head, still catching his breath. "I don't know, Yihua, we need to get out of here." He reached for the buckle when, without warning, a cold glint flickered in the dim cabin light. Time seemed to stretch. Yamamoto's eyes went wide with terror. Then, in a single silent instant, a razor-sharp blade struck. A sickening crack echoed as his skull split open, and blood spurted like a macabre fountain. The entire carriage turned crimson. The metallic stench of fresh blood filled the air, mingling with the icy winter wind that howled through the broken windows. Ichika froze, her heart hammering, utterly paralyzed by the nightmare unfolding before her. Kazuka Nakano finally surrendered to her fear, her scream ripping through the night's stillness. Normally so composed, even she couldn't remain calm in the face of imminent death. She clamped trembling hands over her mouth, trying desperately to muffle the sound. But tears, mingled with blood from a cut on her cheek, slipped past her fingers. Before her, that monstrous thing, this nightmare come to life, was advancing with deliberate, unhurried steps. Her heart thundered so fiercely she thought she might collapse. With shaking fingers, she fumbled at her seatbelt. Panic made her clumsy, but at last she tore it free. The instant the car door swung open, Kazuka flung herself onto the pavement and began to crawl, every muscle driven by a single, burning instinct to survive. The night wind screamed through the deserted road, its icy edge somehow more comforting than the deathly chill lingering in the overturned carriage. Ethan's head swam. Panic had hollowed out every rational thought. All he knew was that he had to flee, had to put as much distance as possible between himself and this nightmare. He dared to look back. In the pale glare of a shattered headlight, a twisted creature was dragging the president's body from the wreckage. Its maw opened wide, teeth glinting as it sank into flesh. Then the monster's head whipped around and locked onto Ethan's terrified figure. Abandoning the corpse, it charged. Ethan scrambled to his feet, legs heavy as lead. He'd been on his feet filming all day, and exhaustion was finally catching up. He tripped, sprawling face first onto the cold asphalt. Heart hammering, he spun around. The beast was less than 10 meters away now, its jagged blade raised high. Just as the blade began its downward arc, a clear, commanding voice pierced the night air. Henshin. Both man and monster froze. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as they turned toward the sound. From the shadows stepped a lone figure whose presence shattered the darkness, a rider in a form-fitting black motorcycle suit, every inch of it bristling with purpose and promise. Ethan's legs were sheathed in the same sleek black trousers, but it was the peculiar, unusually thick belt around his waist that drew every eye. Under normal circumstances, such an ensemble would look absurd, but tonight it had become a beacon of hope. As Ethan whispered the word Henshin, his body convulsed in a brilliant display of power. At the molecular level, his cells realigned. Muscle fibers bulged and rewove themselves until they far exceeded any human limit. Crimson flames seemed to dance across his skin, casting an eerie glow in the darkness. 2 golden horns unfurled from his brow, giving him the imposing silhouette of a war god stepped right out of legend. Kuga! Kazuka Nakano's eyes went wide, disbelief and awe warring on her face. She had spent years navigating the neon-drenched world of film and television, and she knew the Kamen Rider franchise better than most. Those landmark series were staple case studies in every cinematography textbook. And now, before her very eyes, stood a man so uncannily like Kuga, the inaugural hero of the Heisei era, that it felt as though fiction had come alive. Ethan blinked, struggling to believe what he was seeing wasn't a TV scene or a clever CGI trick. Everything before him, down to the grit on the street, felt achingly real. Could the heroes he'd only ever watched on screen really have crossed over into the real world? Or was this all some fragile illusion, ready to shatter at any moment? I won't allow you to hurt anyone. The words rang out like a hammer blow. Kuga, every syllable perfectly measured, stepped forward, voice unwavering. Ethan felt a strange warmth of reassurance wash over him, as if fate had granted him one final spark of hope. Behind Kuga, the parasite beast lunged, its writhing tentacles whipping through the air. In a heartbeat, the rider's blade flashed, a silver arc too swift for any human eye to follow. To an onlooker, the strike would be a blurred mystery until the wound appeared. But in Ethan's eyes, time stilled. He watched every second in sharp relief, and without thinking, reached out and seized the monster's weapon by the hilt. This was no humatter gone rogue. This creature was something far more sinister, a parasitic fiend that fed on humanity itself. And now, its blade lay firmly in Ethan's grasp. Parasitic beasts were the stuff of nightmares, creatures that burrowed into human hosts, took over their bodies, and sometimes even consumed their victim's brain to be reborn as something inhuman. You didn't need some grand supervillain like Gulangi to unleash chaos. These parasites struck without warning, merciless and efficient. Nakano Ichika's heart hammered as a blade of light suddenly cleaved the darkness. When her eyes refocused, she saw Ethan standing between her and the monster, one hand clamped around its razor-sharp talon. Relief surged through her. If he hadn't shown up, she could well have ended up like President Yamamoto, whose empty shell they'd found just yesterday. With a fierce cry, Ethan yanked the beast off balance and drove a devastating kick into its midsection. At that instant, the spirit stone belt at his waist flared to life. A swirl of pale blue energy coalesced into the legendary Kuga sigil upon the creature's armored hide. But Ethan wasn't Rick. Though the belt had been fully restored, Ethan's mind brimmed not with hope, but with fury. The sealing energy twisted into raw killing power. Boom! A deafening blast shook the lab as the parasitic beast's hulking form detonated. Torrents of scorching flame ate away every shred of flesh and bone until only ash and glowing embers drifted through the smoke-choked air. Ethan's heart pounded as he squared off against the seal mage before him. The cavern's torches flickered across the jagged walls, casting long shadows over the shattered runes etched into the stone floor. In the center of the chamber lay the ancient Gulangi belt, its spirit stone buckle pulsing with an inner light. Ethan fastened it around his waist, feeling the hum of power ripple through him. Across the room, the mage, robes swirling in a phantom wind, began to chant. Golden sigils spiraled upward around Ethan, wrapping him in a cage of sealing energy. Each rune burned bright against the dim torchlight, meant to bind him, snuff out his strength. But as the final syllable left the mage's lips, the Gulangi belt flared to life. Brilliant crimson arcs of killing energy leapt from Ethan's belt, slamming into the sealing runes. The two magics recoiled from one another, crackling like thunderclaps. Ethan clenched his fists as shockwaves rolled outward, splintering stalactites overhead. The air itself seemed to rupture, shivering under the strain of opposing forces. In a single deafening roar, the seal shattered. The collision of sealing and killing energy tore through the chamber, sending ripples across space and matter. The mage screamed in surprise as the blast swept over him. In that instant, Ethan's killing intent, pure, unrelenting, surged forward, seeking the enemy's life with relentless precision. A second explosion blossomed at the mage's feet, magnified by the Gulangi belt's unique spirit stone resonance. Flesh and bone disintegrated in an instant, cells dissolved, molecules vaporized, and even the atoms themselves were rent apart. When the light finally dimmed, there was nothing left but an echo of energy fading into the darkness. Ethan staggered to his feet, chest heaving. The air smelled of ozone and dust. Around him, the ruined runes lay silent, the torches guttered, and the cavern returned to an uneasy stillness. Clutching his side, Ethan unfastened the Gulangi belt and let it settle by his feet. The battle was over, its finality as absolute as the void where his enemy had stood. He took a steadying breath, squared his shoulders, and stepped forward into the shadows, ready to face whatever lay beyond. Chapter 1222, The First Step Toward Changing the World. Ichika Nakano stared at the rider standing before her. As he peeled away his mask and armor, she realized how peculiar her first impression had been. She'd thought his battlesuit looked absurd. But now, she understood it wasn't the costume that was strange, it was her own limited expectations. The man who'd emerged from the Kamen Rider role was nothing like the actors she'd seen on TV or the photos she'd scrolled past online. His features were so sharply defined, so vividly alive, that it felt as if he'd stepped out of an entirely different dimension and accidentally crossed into her world. A calm warmth spread through Ichika's chest, dispelling the unease she'd felt the moment they met. She'd only known Kamen Rider as a name, a popular hero in a special effects drama she'd never taken much interest in. Until today, she couldn't understand what made the show so beloved. But standing here, face to face with the real thing, she finally got it. This was no mere costume drama star. This was a living legend, and he was breathtaking. Her heartbeat quickened at the realization. Strange and familiar all at once, the flutter in her chest reminded her of first crushes from long ago. Ethan, once just a name in headlines, had become so much more, and in that instant, Ichika Nakano knew her world would never be the same. As the fear ebbed, Kazuka Nakano realized she couldn't afford to linger on her emotions. A dull ache throbbed at her knees, a stark reminder of how close she'd come to disaster. "Thank you for saving me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked down at her legs, torn denim, scraped skin, and dark rivulets of blood. The sting made her wince, but it was nothing compared to the strange relief she felt toward the man who had leapt into danger for her. Ethan knelt beside her and gently examined the wounds. "Do you need me to take you to a hospital?" he asked. Kazuka hesitated. She didn't want to impose, especially on someone who'd risked his life without a second thought. But the monster she'd just encountered, a creature of nightmare, appearing out of nowhere, had left her unnerved by the very world she'd thought she knew. Swallowing her pride, she met Ethan's calm, steady gaze. "Is that really all right?" she asked. He offered her a reassuring smile and shook his head. "Of course. Let's get you somewhere safe." Kazuka Nakano winced as she pushed herself up off the ground. Aside from a few scrapes and bruises, she was essentially unharmed. There was no need to call an ambulance. but everyone else was dead. She swallowed hard. She had to call the police. As she reached for her phone, the reality of what had just happened crashed over her. The battle with that monstrous creature. The president's sudden, brutal death. None of it had been a hallucination. A tangle of relief, terror, and raw curiosity pulsed through her. Curiosity about this hidden world that had just revealed itself to her. The rider who'd just saved her was still crouched nearby, helmet tucked under one arm. She studied him for a moment, realizing he wasn't either of the Yusuke Onodes she'd read about. He was someone entirely new. "Sir, can I ask your name?" she managed, her voice trembling. He straightened, setting his helmet beside him. "Ethan," he said simply, his tone calm and steady. "Ethan?" She blinked in surprise. In her mind, common riders were embodiments of local legend, heroes born from Japanese lore. She certainly hadn't expected her rescuer to be a foreigner, and yet here he was, standing before her as her savior. Ethan nodded once, offering no further explanation. Kazuka closed her mouth, her phone forgotten in her hand, as 1,000 questions raced through her mind. But for now, all she had was his name, and that was enough to set her heart pounding with both gratitude and wonder. Kazuka Nakano studied Ethan's silent profile, her curiosity only deepening as she sensed the quiet strength he radiated. There was something almost otherworldly about him, an untold background he refused to share. She hesitated, then spoke up again, careful with her words. "What should I tell the police if they arrive?" Ethan considered her question for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Be honest," he said finally. "Lately there have been more and more severe attacks by those creatures. If the police know what we're facing, they can be better prepared." His calm, responsible tone belied his youth, and Kazuka felt a surge of admiration. She had expected a lone, self-reliant hero, someone distant and almost invulnerable. Instead, Ethan's pragmatic compassion painted a different picture, a real person, willing to share the burden with others. In that instant, her respect for him deepened, and she realized that genuine heroism was as much about cooperation and trust as it was about courage. Ethan's willingness to face reality, share information, and stand against evil alongside others won Kazuka Nakano's genuine admiration. "I understand," she said quietly. "I won't reveal your identity, Mr. Ethan." Kazuka nodded gravely. She'd already decided that, if questioned, she would tell the police a mysterious common rider had rescued her and then vanished, protecting Ethan's true name. On the way to the hospital, Ethan drove steadily while Kazuka phoned for help. Soon they spotted the officers and her father waiting at the entrance. Ninomiku, Sujiya, and the others were still asleep upstairs. After making sure Kazuka was safely inside, Ethan slipped away without fanfare. Once inside, Kazuka faced the police's questions with complete honesty, describing everything she had witnessed. But her story, of a masked rider materializing out of nowhere and fighting shadowy foes, sounded to the officers like the fanciful imaginings of a frightened teenager. Worse, they began to suspect she might be mentally unwell. Beside her, Mr. Nakano's face had gone ashen, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the table, an unconscious effort to steady both his hands and his nerves. Officer A paused, pencil hovering over his notepad, and exchanged a troubled look with Officer B. Neither seemed sure how to proceed. It all sounded like something out of a horror movie, not real life. I could hardly believe the tale. "Miss Nakano, I understand you're frightened," Officer Tanaka said gently. "But please remember, we need concrete evidence, not just stories." Even so, once the coroner confirmed the victims' deaths, the police treated the case with the utmost seriousness. They combed the underground parking garage for clues, and that's when I realized something was horribly wrong. The victim's head had been cleanly severed in two. The cut was so perfectly straight, it looked as if a surgical laser or a precision robot had done it. There wasn't a drop of blood on the concrete, no spatter, no puddle, nothing to suggest a struggle. What unsettled me even more were the identical grooves etched into the surrounding walls. They appeared at heights and angles no human could reach, much less wield a blade that way. Based on their depth, orientation, and uniformity, the forensic team immediately ruled out both human and mechanical causes. Then came the final, undeniable proof. The parking garage's surveillance cameras had captured the creature itself. When I watched the footage, my heart pounded. A dark, fluid shape glided into frame, its movements too smooth, too deliberate, too inhuman to belong to any known animal. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't an ordinary crime scene. Something else was lurking in the shadows. Ethan stared in disbelief as the monster appeared on the video feed. Its head was crowned with writhing tentacles, each over 2 meters long and tipped with razor-sharp blades. The creature whipped those lethal limbs so rapidly that the image began to pixelate, frames dropping out entirely in the blur of steel and sinew. Chapter 1223, Kamen Rider Kazuka Nakano. Is that a monster? Officer Bennett's voice dropped to a whisper as he stared at the screen. He'd seen his share of gruesome crime scenes, but nothing prepared him for the footage that played on loop before him. Each replay felt colder, more surreal. Detectives exchanged grim looks. Nobody on their squad had the expertise or the authority to handle evidence like this. Within minutes, the chief ordered the case elevated to a federal task force. The underground parking garage where the incident occurred was sealed off, and everyone on site was placed under quarantine. Sensitive details had to be contained. One leak could trigger widespread panic. By mid-afternoon, an elite SWAT unit arrived with armored vehicles and specialized detection equipment. They swept the lot for any signs of the creature captured on camera, or for anything else out of the ordinary. Meanwhile, the Nakano family's connections proved invaluable. Without them, clearing Ika Nakano for release would have been nearly impossible. After hours of interviews, psychological evaluations, and a thorough medical checkup, the investigators concluded that Ika was telling the truth and suffered only minor injuries. She'd been treated at the hospital, her wounds disinfected, bandaged, and prescribed antibiotics. Exhausted, Ika finally returned to her quiet apartment. She barely registered the sound of the shower running as she peeled off her clothes and let the hot water wash away the grime and tension of the day. Her body ached, but her mind raced with questions. What exactly had she seen, and why did it feel as if the real danger had only just begun? Dr. Yamamoto assured her the procedure would leave no scars, and at that, Yuakao Nakano finally allowed herself to relax. Yet even now, she couldn't stop replaying last night's events in her mind. A Kamen Rider materializing in our world, battling horrific monsters and rescuing innocents. The whole affair was more thrilling and far better written than any light novel she'd ever read. Unable to shake her curiosity, she booted up her laptop and logged into the streaming site. The title she clicked on was Kamen Rider Kuga. Leaning forward, she muttered to herself, "So this is Kuga, the white, newborn form." On screen, Yusuke Godai, decked in gleaming ivory armor, stood poised between two jagged rocks. Nakano studied him closely. Without that spark of fighting spirit at the start, he'd never have evolved into his blazing ultimate form. A sudden thought struck her. If Godai could unlock his first transformation so quickly, then Ethan, whom she'd encountered barely 12 hours ago, must have done the same. She blinked at the clock in the corner of her screen. Dawn was already breaking outside. Exhaustion threatened to pull her under, but Nakano couldn't tear her eyes away. There was so much more to learn about this rider, and about Ethan himself. Ichika woke to an empty house, sunlight slanting through the curtains. Her father had insisted she stay home and rest after what happened last night. She'd tumbled face first into her bed and slept straight through until hunger finally dragged her to consciousness at noon. When she padded into the dining room, the housekeeper was already placing a tray of lunch before her: fragrant soup, freshly baked bread, and a bowl of fruit. Her older sisters, Nino, Miku, Yotsuba, and Itsuki, peeked around the door, their faces etched with concern. None of them dared interrupt her rest more than necessary. They had been relieved to find that Ichika hadn't insisted on going to school, but their worried glances told her they were still on edge. Ichika offered each of them a reassuring smile before settling into her seat. As she ate, a single thought drifted into her mind. What is Ethan doing right now? Ethan. Even the name felt charged with electricity. She couldn't shake the memory of him, his calm determination, the way he'd swept into her life with unexpected resolve. Last night's encounter wasn't romantic in any conventional sense, yet it had wounded her heart and mind more deeply than any love story ever could. It was raw, unsettling, and utterly compelling, and she feared she would never be free of its echo. After lunch, boredom set in. With nothing urgent to occupy her, Ichika retired to the living room and put on a special drama film she'd borrowed from the library. She curled up on the couch with a soft blanket, her thoughts drifting back to Ethan between scenes. Outside her bubble of domestic quiet, there was troubling news from the firm. The president had died suddenly, and operations were now in jeopardy. Even if the company managed to limp along, Ichika knew her upcoming projects and her own role would face serious delays. With the world outside in flux and her personal life turned upside down by Ethan's arrival, Ichika wondered which turbulence would prove more difficult to weather. Ethan stared at the flickering image of Kamen Rider Kuga on his computer screen and sighed, "I wish I could become Kamen Rider Kuga." No sooner had the words left his lips than ripples of data cascaded across the monitor. Ethan rubbed his eyes, convinced the computer was malfunctioning, until a solid, hefty belt shot out of the screen and clanked onto his desk. He knelt to inspect it. This is the Aguru Spirit Stone belt?" he whispered. He'd read about it in Rinto Laboratories files, a prototype built on the original Amadam Spirit Stone. Once bonded to its wearer's mind, it could generate a living armor, a superhuman exoskeleton capable of feats no ordinary person could match. Ethan still couldn't believe he'd summoned it simply by wishing to be like Kuga. His fingers hovered over the buckle as doubt crept in. He'd never seen himself as the heroic type. Yet memories of last night flooded back. If Ethan hadn't jumped in at the last moment, she would have died. He drew a steadying breath, slid the belt around his waist, and locked it into place, ready to discover what being a Kamen Rider truly meant. Ethan Nakano stared at the Aguru Spirit Stone belt lying in the dirt, his heart pounding with equal parts dread and determination. Life and death had always felt beyond his control, but no longer. If he wanted to protect himself and everyone he cared about, he would have to become Kamen Rider Kuga. He picked up the belt and wrapped it around his waist, bracing for pain or rejection, but none came. Instead, he felt a gentle hum as filaments of spirit stone energy slipped beneath his skin and melded with his body. He ran a hand over his flat abdomen. There was no bulky buckle, only a faint vibration coursing through him. Resolute, Ethan promised himself he would train relentlessly and master real fighting skills. Charging into battle unprepared was a death sentence, not heroism. Once he had fully awakened as Kuga, he would seek out Mr. Luther again and keep the promise he'd made. Taking a steadying breath, Ethan called out, "Henshin!" and braced himself for the transformation that would define his destiny as Kamen Rider Kuga. Ethan summoned the Aguru Spirit Stone belt, and it snapped into place around Kazuya Nakano's waist. Thanks to Kazuya's powerful mental conditioning, he didn't need an elaborate pose like Yusuke Wudao. He simply became Kamen Rider Kuga in an instant. "So this is the newborn white form," he murmured, eyes shining as he studied the sleek, ivory armor in the mirror. Watching from the side, Ethan handed another Aguru belt to Kazuya. When Kazuya accepted it without hesitation, Ethan allowed himself a satisfied grin. "Excellent," he said quietly. "Now, what civilian identities should I assign to Kuga's various forms? Ichika Kano, Reno, Mayamiku?" Ethan's new obsession was to warp this ordinary world into something far stranger, parasitic beasts, hidden energies, impossible powers. On paper, this reality shouldn't allow any of it. But it didn't matter. Ethan's energy levels dwarfed the natural laws here, and with his Kryptonian heritage, he was essentially omniscient and omnipotent. A self-styled master of the multiverse, he had no weaknesses. To stand against him, one would need to be stronger, or more all-seeing and more all-powerful, conditions no one in this world could possibly meet. In short, no force here could hope to resist Ethan. It could only weep, pleading with Ethan not to push too far. Then, resigned, it lay back and let Cao Cao proceed. Resistance was pointless. It might as well surrender and find what little comfort it could. After all, Ethan's forceful methods served a greater good. He was, in fact, upgrading the entire world with his own power. What the future might bring was no concern of his. No matter what form it took, whatever came next would simply have to become what it was meant to be.